Chapter 1271. My name is Zhang Zhongshi, and I am a direct descendant of the vast Yang Forbidden Array family. My performance has been outstanding since I was young, and I am regarded as the future star of the family. My life should have been bright and resplendent, but something unexpected happened. That crazy demon killed my wife and son, and they were also destroyed. The life I had was completely destroyed. In the years to come, my only goal in life is to kill the Peach Garden Bifone and avenge my wife and son who died tragically. However, Bifone was too strong, and the existence of Peach Garden made people despair. My family chose to reconcile, but I could understand the resentment in my heart. Although the Zhang family had entered the Sage Dao circle with their status as a supreme saint, how could they contend with the Peach Garden of Terror? However, understanding didn't mean that I would give up on the hatred of my wife and child just because of my family's choice. I made my move, but I failed many times. Every time I failed, although the Peach Garden did not kill me, I gradually felt despair. Bifong is getting stronger and stronger, and the more time passes, the less likely it is for me to kill him. Just as I was lost and in pain, not knowing what to do, someone gave me another choice. This meant that there was a high chance that he could kill Bifong with his own hands. However, the price of making this choice was that he would lose everything and become a puppet that was being controlled. As I said before, the only reason I was still alive was to kill Bifong. Therefore, there was no need to hesitate. I accepted this choice, signed the most terrifying contract in the world, and came to the Lost Garden. However, I failed again. I was very, very unwilling to accept this, but I no longer had the chance to attack. The power of the contract began to activate, and pain surged out like a tidal wave, gradually drowning my consciousness. If nothing unexpected happened, I would soon become a puppet. I would continue to live in this world, but I would no longer be myself. He had crossed the boundless sea of bitterness and reached the other shore of cultivation. Only then would he be considered to have condensed the great Tao and become a true saint. While the He Jimin was in seclusion, he was the most powerful existence in the vast Yang world. With a single thought, he could cause the heavens and earth to change color, and with a flip of his hand, he could cause winds and clouds to surge. Some heaven-defying cultivators might not be afraid of a half-sage, but there were very few people who could make a true sage suffer. Almost none of them had ever appeared. Therefore, Zhang Zhongshi never expected that his ending would be like this. In order to enter the Lost Garden, he had paid an enormous price, but this puppet body had actually been destroyed just like that. Everything happened too suddenly. His eyes locked onto the fleeing blood-robed man. Then he lifted his hand and grasped out. This grab contained the power of a true sage. With the strength of the puppet body, even if he had intentionally modified it, it could only withstand 3 strikes at most. Every single time was extremely precious, so he naturally gave it his all without holding anything back. But just as the 5 fingers clenched, a black shadow appeared in front of Zhang Zhongshi. He didn't even have time to react before he was hit. Pong! The puppet's body shattered into pieces. The consciousness hidden within was stunned for a moment before quickly dispersing. He had thought that his puppet body would die, but he had never thought that his consciousness would be annihilated along with it. The divine path was, after all, the divine path. When his consciousness was destroyed, it was like the final radiance of the setting sun before death. His perception was instantly magnified, and he saw clearly the person who had inexplicably caused him to suffer such a great loss under the blood-red robe. It was him. His first reaction was that it was absolutely impossible. Then, it turned into a palpitation that came from the bottom of his heart. Then, it turned into a killing intent that was almost tangible. This was the first time he had felt such a sense of unease. Moreover, the other party was a junior that he had never placed in his eyes before. But thinking about it carefully, it seemed that he had been constantly suffering losses at the hands of this junior from the very start, all the way until today. Today, what he had lost was a fragment of his consciousness. Then what about next time? Would he be able to end his life? The word fate appeared in the depths of Zhang Zhongshi's heart. He had to die. He absolutely could not be allowed to leave the Lost Garden alive. The true sage's dissipating consciousness erupted with the last of its strength, forming a terrifying divine sense attack that swept out in all directions. It did not possess any killing power, but rather, it did its best to cover as wide a range as possible. Soon, it covered nearly the entire Lost Garden. Thus, in the next moment, the phantom image of a towering mountain supporting the heavens appeared in the minds of all sentient beings in the Lost Garden, including the foreign cultivators. It was similar to a divine sense mark. Shwa, shwa. Countless eyes gathered in the depths of the Lost Garden. They were shaken, filled with fear, and also filled with a burning heat. Although it was only a phantom image, it was enough to let them feel that this mountain was different. Involuntarily, an intense premonition rose in their hearts. This mountain contained the greatest good fortune within the Lost Garden. Let's go take a look. Ever since the Lost Garden was discovered, there has never been any news related to this mountain. There must be some mysterious mystery within. We can't miss out on this. Cultivators were generally a group of people with great courage and an astonishing ability to take risks. The higher one's cultivation, the more this was true. Otherwise, they would have long since faded into the crowd. How could they possess their current cultivation? And of the cultivators that entered the Lost Garden today, none of them were weak. After suffering the strange divine sense attack, after a brief period of silence, they began to move. Nine-Headed was also among them, but at this moment, his complexion was dignified. Between his eyebrows, there was still shock that hadn't yet faded away. Just what had happened that could destroy his honorable master's divine sense. And the one who caused all of this was actually the Peach Blossom Garden's Chinyu, that boy whose fame had spread throughout the world and was praised by countless cultivators of the Holy Tao Circle. But he had always disdained him. He couldn't figure it out. He took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. If he couldn't figure it out, then he wouldn't bother thinking about it. He had to do everything he could to accomplish his honorable master's orders, and that was to kill Chinyu, no matter the cost. Lei Xiaoyu had a calm expression. She helplessly said, "I already said it's useless. Elder Senior Apprentice Brother, there's no need to waste your energy." In front of them was a life source that had already turned black. It still existed, but it had already been contaminated by a terrifying strength. Now, as long as a single drop mixed into the clouds and fell down, it could turn everything within 1,000 miles into a land of death. The elder senior apprentice brother frowned. He lowered his head and condensed the black life source. Then he looked up, a look of pity in his eyes. He smiled and said, "There's no problem. The only reason we failed this time was because our life source wasn't strong enough. We still have a chance." Lei Xiaoyu curled her lips. She really wanted to tell him to stop dreaming, but in the face of his smile, she could only sigh faintly. "I just feel that it's really not worth it to waste time and my life source on this matter." The elder senior apprentice brother was about to speak when his complexion changed. In the next moment, a boundless divine sense swept out and a voice exploded in his mind. Could it be that this was the legendary mountain? It actually existed. After hesitating for a second, the elder senior apprentice brother turned and walked away. "Junior apprentice sister, let's go join in on the fun." Lei Xiaoyu's lips twitched. Who didn't know that the elder senior apprentice brother of the Peach Blossom Garden was someone who disliked joining in on the fun the most? What he loved the most was to go into seclusion and cultivate. First, he could cultivate to become stronger, and second, it was quiet and peaceful. Now, he was going to join in on the fun of his own initiative. Was it for her? The people of the Peach Blossom Garden, besides their teacher, were all stupid. They hadn't changed at all after so many years. It was all thanks to their teacher. If it weren't for him being strong enough and shameless enough, the Peach Blossom Garden would have been razed to the ground long ago. The fragment in Qin Yu's hand seemed to experience the endless years. It turned into powder and sprinkled down from his fingers. He turned his head to look at the place where Zhang Zhongshi had been killed. He took a deep breath, but he still felt as if he were dreaming. The puppet body of a dignified, true saint, a formidable existence that made him feel as if he were certain he would die, had been destroyed like this. What was that black shadow just now? It was far too fast, so fast that even with his current cultivation, he couldn't see it. Moreover, why was it like this? He looked down at the powder that had been blown away by the wind. Qin Yu subconsciously licked the corners of his lips. Just a moment ago, he had been desperately fleeing for his life. The fragment in his hand had become increasingly hot, and terrifying fluctuations had erupted behind him. At that moment, a voice suddenly sounded out in his mind. Do you need protection? Between life and death, Qin Yu didn't even have time to think before he instinctively made a choice. He needed it. Of course he needed it. He needed it far too much. Then, what happened next was that the true saint's puppet body was killed in a single strike, and its consciousness was erased. However, a true saint was a true saint in the end. Even in death, it could still toss and turn. Qin Yu was the first to hear the explosive divine sense shockwaves. He certainly didn't think that the true saint thought that he was too lonely and helpless after entering this mountain alone. So he called for help. The greatest possibility was that the true saint was well aware of Qin Yu's current condition. The more chaotic the situation became, the more likely something would happen to him. But he didn't necessarily have to go in. Before, he had no choice but to go in because he had no path of retreat. If he didn't fight, then he would just be waiting for death. But now, the true saint's puppet body had been smashed to pieces. Qin Yu had one less danger to deal with, and could turn around and leave. The old turtle and the stone pagoda had said that this mountain was too dangerous. Even though he knew there was a tiger on the mountain, he still chose to go into the tiger's mountain. These words were indeed heroic and made one's heart surge with excitement. But at the very least, one had to look at the situation. With Qin Yu's current situation, who knew when he would explode with a bang? It wasn't enough to seek stability, so why would he want to play with danger and excitement? That's right, I'm going to leave and leave you all to struggle in this mountain. I'm going to find a source of life to extend my life. With this thought in mind, Qin Yu turned and left. At the same time, a trace of contempt towards the true saint appeared in his heart. It wasn't because he had inexplicably killed the true saint's puppet body that his mentality had inflated. Rather, it was because Qin Yu felt that the true saint's mind was only at an average level. You're on the verge of death. What's the point of spending so much effort to make a live broadcast? I'm going to withdraw from the competition midway. As for the rest, you can play however you want. It has nothing to do with me. But soon, this contemptuous thought froze in his heart. Along with it, the smile on Qin Yu's face also froze. This was because he discovered that he couldn't leave. The mountain in front of him was like a giant magnet, firmly sucking him in. There wasn't any reaction before, but as Qin Yu turned around and left, the suction was immediately activated. So in the next moment, with a whoosh, Qin Yu turned into a black dot and was sucked into the mountain. Dong! With a loud bang, Qin Yu crashed into the ground. His first thought was that this stone was extremely hard. It didn't break at all. The counterforce was like a great tide, constantly crashing upwards. With a loud, crackling sound, there was the sound of flesh and bones breaking apart. Qin Yu's blood-red robe suddenly turned even redder. With great difficulty, he finally resisted the damage from the counterforce. Qin Yu let out a long breath. Just a moment ago, his body of rules almost couldn't hold on any longer. He had imagined many times that he would lose control of his body of rules and completely collapse. But he never imagined that the reason for this would be because he fell too violently and was killed by the counterforce. This cause of death, TSK, what a strange one. Luckily, he didn't die. Qin Yu hurriedly looked up. Unexpectedly, everything was very quiet. It was so quiet that Qin Yu didn't even feel the slightest threat. This was completely different from what the old turtle in the stone tower had said before, that this mountain was extremely dangerous. Just now, when Qin Yu fell to the ground, as long as one wasn't deaf, they would definitely be able to hear it. Was it because his luck was good? Or were the creatures in this mountain deaf? Qin Yu's thoughts raced through his mind, but he finally suppressed them one by one. Although he couldn't find a reason, it was still a good thing that there was no danger. He looked up at the sky. The branches of the giant ancient tree were lush and luxuriant. The crown of the tree was spread out like a giant umbrella that covered the skies. But in the end, there were still some gaps where he could see the sky, where light sprinkled down. He had to leave first. Even if there wasn't any danger, he still felt uncomfortable staying in this place. Stepping forwards, Chinyu shot into the skies. But just as he was about to rush past the crown of the tree, his complexion changed, and he cursed inwardly. It was coming again. A terrifying suction force instantly enveloped him, tightly wrapping him within. Then, he was like a free-falling stone as he smashed into the ground with a loud bang. Crackle. That's right, it was another bout of tossing and turning on the edge of death. Chinyu managed to hold on with great difficulty. He looked up at the nearby skies and bitterly smiled. It was over. It seemed he couldn't escape. Otherwise, he really didn't have the confidence he could survive another one. Since this mountain was so hospitable and wasn't willing to let him leave, then he would just have to explore it a bit. When his condition stabilized a little, Chinyu took a deep breath. He sensed his surroundings and began to move. His speed was slow. Everything in front of him was extremely quiet, even giving off a strange feeling of tranquility. It was fine at the start, but as time passed, it gradually made one feel a strange sense of unease. Kacha-kacha, this was the sound of a thick layer of fallen leaves on the ground being trampled on, forming a clear feedback of his footsteps. Chinyu frowned, and his complexion darkened. This was because it was far too quiet. It was so quiet that besides the sound of fallen leaves being trampled on, he couldn't hear anything else. The ancient tree that supported the heavens and its countless branches and leaves remained motionless. It was like he was in a world where time had stopped. Besides him, everything else was a scene in a painting. Chapter 1272. Not just that, but Chinyu discovered something absolutely horrifying. Ever since he entered the mountain, he had been spinning in place. This wasn't to say that the scene in front of him was the same, because that would be too low level. Rather, it gave off a familiar feeling. The towering trees in front of him, the vines growing from the ground, the low clusters of thorns, all of them were completely different, but they also seemed exactly the same. Chinyu thought for a moment and prepared to make a mark. Then his thoughts stirred. The old turtle hurriedly said, "Master, just leave this to me. There won't be any problems. Be careful. Something isn't right here. There might be a crisis erupting at any time." The old turtle patted his chest. "Master can rest assured. As long as I am here, I will absolutely not allow you to be harmed." Chinyu's eyes flashed. "Stone Pagoda, did you hear that? Learn from me. Only when I leave this place alive can I help you take revenge." The stone pagoda's calm and steady voice echoed out. "Master's right." Chinyu silently took several more steps. Then he suddenly stopped. He frowned and looked in front of him. The old turtle had a puzzled expression. "Master, why aren't you walking?" Chinyu said, "Because I can't figure out when I was schemed against." What a brilliant method. Schemed against? Who schemed against Master? I will fight them to the death. The old turtle continued to express his loyalty. Chinyu said, "I don't know who it was, but the two of you should know." After a pause, his eyes became even colder. "In truth, your disguising abilities are quite strong. I didn't sense anything wrong, but that old turtle fellow is afraid of death to the extreme, so he would never say those words just now. Moreover, I haven't had a chance to ask about the stone pagoda's origins. First, I was afraid he wouldn't say anything, and second, I didn't want to stir up more trouble, even though I felt that trouble was inevitable. In short, I don't know what the problem is with the stone pagoda, so there is no way for me to help him take revenge." After a brief silence, the old turtle chuckled. "What a smart little fellow. He actually discovered it so quickly. This makes the two of us feel no sense of accomplishment." His tone suddenly changed, becoming gloomy. "Aren't you afraid that if you expose us like this, you will force us to attack you? After all, you're like a turtle in a jar, meat on a chopping board, and you can only wait to be slaughtered by us." Shurta said indifferently. There is no need to say so much to him. "Originally, I wanted to save some energy. Since we have already been discovered, let's make our move." There was silence. After several breaths of time, Qin Yu lightly said, "Indeed, it's just as I thought. The two of you are just stalling for time. If he really had the means to kill me, he wouldn't have used such a method." He turned to look around and raised his hand to rub the space between his eyebrows. "You probably don't know this, but I learned some tricks to view the world in the past. The person who taught me is probably very amazing. Therefore, although I can only be considered to have learned some superficial knowledge, it is still effective. Therefore, although this world appears to be perfect, there are still some problems. For example, it's not big enough. That's why I keep going in circles. How much power could a small labyrinth world, or a painting world, withstand? That's right, I can't find a way out. But since there's no way out, I'll just break open one." Qin Yu lifted a hand and punched out. At the same time, his lips curled up in a smile. "Moreover, the reason I spoke so much was to stall for time. After all, with this ability to view the world, I can still find some traces and save myself a great deal of effort. If I'm affected by you too, then I won't be able to do so." Two roars sounded out at the same time, distorted by anger. "I'll eat you. I'll definitely eat you." Qin Yu was expressionless. "If your teeth are good enough, feel free to do as you please." As his fist fell, he punched out a second time without hesitation. The world in front of him was still without a single ripple, without the least bit of fluctuation. It was like Qin Yu's all-out punch had smashed into a sponge and was cleanly absorbed. "Ha ha ha! Give up. In our hallucinatory world, you cannot escape." A low and deep cackle echoed in his ears. "Little by little, I will break all your bones and suck out all the marrow hidden within. That taste will definitely be delicious." Qin Yu remained unmoved. He punched out a third time, then a fourth, a fifth. The two voices became increasingly arrogant, increasingly insolent. They drilled into Qin Yu's ears, trying to influence his will. 17th punch. Dong! A dull sound suddenly echoed through the world. Then, layers upon layers of ripples appeared where the fists landed, constantly spreading outwards. The two voices that filled his eardrums suddenly stopped. In the next moment, there was the sound of shattering as cracks appeared in front of him. His field of vision darkened and then brightened. Within Qin Yu's empty eyes, a brilliant light burst out. The old turtle wept tears of joy. "Master, my dearest master, you've finally woken up. I was really scared to death." The stone tower said, "Master, be careful." There was the sound of breaking air. A blade-like leg came crashing down. Qin Yu roared out loud. The net around him instantly broke apart, and the leg fell to the ground. Looking around, he saw that he was in an incomparably massive cave. The interior was covered with countless giant spider webs, and the ground was piled high with all sorts of skeletons of different sizes. These were all prey that had been killed, and the hunters that had done all of this were rapidly moving through the spiderwebs. Several dozen pairs of compound eyes locked onto Qin Yu's body. They were actually two large spiders. One was pitch black, as if it had been splashed with ink, and the other was crimson red, as if it had been dyed with blood. "Hee hee, I never thought that a little insect like you would wake up so quickly. What a pity." The black spider's mouth emitted strange syllables, its meaning actually understandable. It was the one that had attacked Qin Yu just now. It had 8 thick legs beneath its abdomen, each one shining with a metallic luster. From the sound of it, it was a male. The blood spider's voice was calm. "Why are you wasting words with him? Kill him, drink his blood, and eat his meat." It was actually a male's voice. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. Looking at the current situation, it was unknown just how many years these two giant spiders had lived here for, but they were actually male and female living together. I couldn't help but suspect whether or not the two of you still had a normal sexual orientation. I fear it will be very difficult." As if stung by Qin Yu's loving gaze, the red spider screeched and rushed forwards. Qin Yu punched out a fist, and the red spider was shaken backwards. Qin Yu was also forced backwards. At the same time, his body began to crack apart, and a familiar pain invaded his mind. Qin Yu frowned. It wasn't because of the wounds that had appeared. He had long since adapted to the constant waves of pain brought about by his body of rules that were on the verge of collapse. The crux of the problem was the blood-red robe he was wearing. Although a robe was a robe, the one Chin Yu was wearing was different. It was a different form of existence for the purple-back blue-wing ants. It could be regarded as a protective treasure that was connected to Chin Yu's mind. Before, every time Chin Yu's body cracked apart and blood gushed out, the purple-back blue-wing ants would only swallow it after receiving permission. But just now, before he could even think about it, his blood had been absorbed by the blood-red robe. Whoosh! With the sound of breaking air, the black spider hurtled forwards. Chin Yu took a deep breath and lifted a hand to push it back. His body was torn apart in many places and blood gushed out. Then it was absorbed by the blood-red robe, exactly the same as before. Fire! Chin Yu shouted out loud. He stepped forwards and flames appeared between his fingers. If one looked carefully, they would discover that these burning flames were constantly shrinking and collapsing, causing a strange darkness to appear at the core of the flames. Law flames. This was what Chin Yu had obtained in a comatose state in the great lake of magma before he swallowed the flesh and blood of the spirit snake. It was also the fundamental reason why the purple-back blue-wing ants had changed their living state. But now, the law flames in his palm leapt up and down, but the blood-red robe on his body didn't respond at all. This was naturally abnormal. Although he found it hard to believe, he had experienced many things in his life. Chin Yu soon composed himself, but he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. This place was truly worthy of being called the Old Turtle and the Stone Pagoda. Both of them had said that this was an extremely terrifying place, but from the moment he entered until now, Chin Yu still hadn't figured out his true situation. In fact, he hadn't even had the chance to personally see what this mountain was like. He couldn't help but admit that this was indeed a horrifying and frightening matter. He took a deep breath and thrust his fingers forwards. Law flames flew out, igniting the dense spider webs. In the blink of an eye, a boundless sea of fire had appeared. The black and red spiders screamed out in anger. They desperately rushed towards Chin Yu, but they were forced back again and again by him. During this process, Chin Yu's eyes were constantly observing the cave beneath his blood-red robes. He constantly analyzed and made adjustments according to the feedback from the burning flames of the law. After being struck again and again, his body of laws was constantly broken and damaged. Gradually, the strength within his body began to riot and show signs of collapse. Chin Yu furrowed his eyebrows, but there was no change in his eyes. In a crisis, he needed to remain calm. Panicking would only accelerate the process of his own destruction. Of course, what was more important was that Chin Yu had grasped some key things. A moment later, the pale-faced Chin Yu suddenly drew backwards. Disregarding the raging flames, he passed through the burning spider webs and arrived at a part of the cave wall that had been burnt red by the flames of the law. He lifted a hand and punched out. Walala! The stone wall shattered and stones flew everywhere. With Chin Yu's fist as the center, a hole appeared in just a breath of time. The hole was lit up and connected to the outside world. The black and red spiders roared in anger. They crazily threw themselves at Chin Yu. At the same time, they spat out mucus from their mouths in an attempt to block the hole. "I hope we don't meet again," Chin Yu muttered. He stepped forwards and vanished into the light outside the hole. Shwa! Chin Yu opened his eyes once more. "Master, my dearest master, you've finally woken up. I was really scared to death." The old turtle screamed. Chin Yu's lips twitched. He thought that it was exactly the same. Did he have to do it again? He took a deep breath and his thoughts stirred. The old turtle immediately screamed out in pain. "Master, what did I do wrong, master? How could you treat me like this?" After drawing out the strength of the old turtle, Chin Yu calmed down a little. This was the same strength attribute as the old turtle from before. Ignoring its sorrowful cries, Chin Yu said, "Stone Pagoda. Master, I'm here. Is there something you want to say to me?" The stone pagoda was silent for a moment. Then it said, "Master, I want to tell you that your luck is quite good. Moreover, you've truly awakened. Because I'm not sure how many dreams you've experienced, I can only teach you a method to test if it's real or fake. For instance, when you killed the spirit snake, you could summon that figure. Qin Yu didn't hesitate. His thoughts stirred. Above his head, the phantom of a sun and moon appeared. As they intersected, a phantom appeared. But this time, it was different from before. The moment this phantom appeared, Qin Yu's heart shrank. He subconsciously shrank back and dispelled the phantom of the sun and moon. Why did it feel as if he had a guilty conscience just now? It was like he was facing his elders after doing something wrong. He couldn't summon that woman again, at least not now. That woman, why do I suddenly feel that she is so familiar? She was clearly just a phantom before, and I've never seen her before. Qin Yu rubbed his temples. He felt as if he had forgotten something, but no matter how he tried, he couldn't find anything. But at the very least, there was one thing that he had truly awakened. This was because there shouldn't be anything that could simulate that woman's phantom. Why do I think this? I seem to know just how powerful that woman is, but I've clearly never seen her before. Stop. I can't think about this anymore. My head is going to explode. But Qin Yu didn't directly choose to believe it. He communicated with the purple-back blue-wing ants, and in the next moment, the flames of the rules erupted, wrapping around him. The flames dispersed the darkness and illuminated the entire cave. Countless thick cobwebs of dust appeared in front of Qin Yu's eyes. Most of them were broken. Amongst the countless bones on the ground, there were two incomparably large skeletons nestled together. If he hadn't seen them before, he might have been confused. But Qin Yu had seen them before, so he naturally recognized them. They were the black and red spiders he had encountered just now. Moreover, this cave was completely the same as the one he had seen before. Qin Yu took a deep breath and extinguished the flames of the rules. He took a deep breath and said, "Stone Pagoda, tell me what you know." "Yes, master." The stone pagoda seemed to have been prepared for this. After a brief pause, it calmly said, "In ancient times, there existed a terrifying life form in the vast young world called the illusory world. It was once the nightmare of all life in this world, and even the highest ancient life forms didn't dare to provoke it. There are very few records of the illusory world spider, and I'm not too clear on the specifics. But there's one thing I can be sure of. The illusory energy within the illusory world spider can instantly pull the consciousness of a living being into the illusory world they weave. In the legends, the illusory world has a total of 18 levels. Only by passing through all of them can one's consciousness return. But often, before the consciousness can break free, the prey has already become the flesh and blood in the belly of the illusory world spider. Even if there are occasionally powerful life forms that successfully restore their consciousness, they will no longer believe in this world and will ultimately destroy themselves. Qin Yu's complexion changed. 18 levels of illusory worlds. And before this, he had only experienced 2 levels, and he couldn't help but doubt the world he lived in. If he really did experience 18 levels, Qin Yu feared he would go completely insane. Master's luck is truly good. These 2 illusory world spiders have died many years ago, and their remaining illusory energy has nearly dissipated. Otherwise, the stone pagoda didn't finish speaking, but its meaning was clear. Qin Yu took a deep breath and looked at the cave. He had just entered this mountain, and this was only the cave of 2 illusory world spiders that had died many years ago. Yet, it was already dangerous to such a degree. To say it was dangerous was truly dangerous. This was because everything he experienced in the illusory world was reflected in his body in the outside world. If it weren't for Qin Yu discovering the truth behind the 2 levels of the illusory world early on and shattering it at the fastest speed possible, his body of rules might have already collapsed. Just what sort of place was this mountain? Besides that, there was another question hidden deep in Qin Yu's heart. Now, in this cave, were these 2 illusory world spiders that were snuggling together in death really living together? Chapter 1273. According to what the Stone Pagoda said, the skeleton of the illusory world spider was a top material for creating an illusory array treasure. Its value could no longer be described with just the word precious. Although Qin Yu didn't know how long he could live for, he still followed the principle of not wasting anything. He took them apart and took them away. As long as he left the Lost Garden, even if he couldn't use them in the end, he could still return them to the Garden Master and exchange them for a considerable number of contribution points. After carefully searching through the monsters and determining that besides the two skeletons, there was nothing else he could use, Chinyu restored his condition and decided to leave. For the time being, this place was safe. It was likely because the illusory energy within the illusory world spider skeleton hadn't dissipated yet, so the other ancient life forms didn't dare to approach. But with Chinyu's current condition, it was impossible for him to hide here. He had to find a source of life or something similar as soon as possible to maintain his body of rules. The entrance to the stone cave was above him. When Chinyu was sucked into the mountain, he had fallen in through the entrance and was attacked by the illusory energy. He didn't know what was happening outside. Probing with his divine sense, he didn't discover anything wrong. But facing this mountain, Chinyu didn't dare to be careless at all. He thought for a moment and said, "Shadow, can you sense the outside? Is there anything wrong?" The old turtle, Chinyu frowned. Master, after I entered this mountain, my senses were blocked." His voice was filled with the desire to cry, but no tears came out. The stone pagoda was showing off again. Damn it, he even knew about the illusory world spider. He should have been doing his best to stabilize his position, but something like this had actually happened. The stone pagoda felt that his fate was truly pitiful. Chinyu's complexion darkened. After entering the Lost Garden, the reason he hadn't encountered any trouble wasn't because the ancient life forms were hospitable, but because the old turtle's super strong perception allowed him to evade ahead of time. But now this trick had failed. Chinyu's first thought was that the rules of the Lost Garden had discovered his cheating method, so they had taken extra care and abolished it. He was used to having the old turtle guide him. If he were to go blind, who knew what he would encounter? Moreover, this was clearly an incomparably terrifying mountain. This was truly killing him. Is there no way to break through? The old turtle smiled bitterly. I can't. I've already tried. The more I resist, the stronger the suppression becomes. I can't move at all. The stone pagoda said, I can feel this suppressive force as well. It's coming from the mountain beneath our feet. There must be a great secret hidden here. Chinyu rubbed between his eyebrows. He thought to himself, secret or not, I'm not in the mood to care about it right now. The main thing is how to survive. His mind was a mess. After several breaths of time, Chinyu lifted a hand and patted his forehead. With a light smacking sound, his eyes became tranquil once more. He was the one who lost his composure. The old tortoise was indeed sharp, but it was only after he returned from the abyss that he received assistance. Didn't he survive all those years ago without the help of the old tortoise? In the end, people still had to rely on themselves. Chinyu had already thought this through, and now he was only confirming it once more. Relying too much on external forces was, strictly speaking, putting the cart before the horse. He had to be more vigilant in the future. Chinyu took a deep breath and looked at the exit above his head. His divine sense swept out once more to make sure there wasn't anything wrong. He grabbed a bone of some unknown creature. Although it had been dead for countless years and had been corroded into a pale white by the passage of time, it still felt heavy in his hand. He threw the bone out. With a loud crack, it seemed to have struck something and then fell to the ground. Then there was silence. After waiting for several breaths of time, nothing happened. Without hesitation, Chinyu took a step forward. With a loud explosion, he shot into the skies. Damn, he had used too much strength. As he rushed into the skies, countless branches came crashing down at him. Chinyu suddenly thought back to everything he experienced in the illusion world. His complexion changed, and he hurriedly reached out a hand. After tearing off several branches, he finally stopped just before he broke through the treetop. And at this time, he could clearly feel a layer of imprisoning strength. It was a bit soft, like a giant rubber net that wrapped around the entire mountain. The more he rushed up, the stronger the rebound would be. A massive shadow passed above his head. A terrifying bird howled past, its wings stirring up strong winds that caused countless thick trees to violently sway. Chinyu hurriedly hid himself. But in truth, in the eyes of this bird, he was at most a strange-looking little insect. Even if it saw him, it wouldn't have any interest in him. In the blink of an eye, the bird had flown far away, vanishing from sight. But this didn't mean that the bird had left the mountain. Rather, it was far, far too large. Large enough that with this bird's size and speed, it could recklessly fly about. Letting out a light breath, Chinyu reached out a hand and carefully probed the possibility of tearing open the imprisonment. But he soon chose to give up. Luckily, everything went smoothly. When he returned to the ground, he turned his head and looked around, and then he froze in place. By borrowing the light of the old turtle, Chinyu had seen over a dozen sources of life of various sizes since he entered the Lost Garden. Among them, there was even a purple-quality high-level source of life that he had snatched from Su Shi. His horizons could be considered high enough, but he was still shaken by the scene in front of him. He subconsciously stopped breathing. Finally, Chinyu let out a long breath. Then he sucked in a deep breath. His fragile body of rules immediately reacted. Several wounds opened up on his body and blood gushed out. But this time, Chinyu really didn't react at all. One reason was that he was used to it, but the more important reason was that the scene in front of him had left his mind shaken, and he was still in an absent-minded state. In front of him could be called a basin. The entrance to the cave was in the center, and ancient trees grew within. Beneath these ancient trees, there were stones of different sizes casually piled together, forming a simple wall. Now, most of these walls had already collapsed. Less than 10 to 20% of them were still intact, revealing what was hidden within. Source of life. A wall, a source of life. There were 12 of them here. At a glance, one could tell that they were of extremely high quality. There were even 2 of them that were faintly purple in color. This was a pleasant surprise, an extremely pleasant surprise. The bone that Chinyu had tossed out was now in one of these places. It wasn't far from the source of life. If it weren't for the fact that its shape was easy to recognize and that he had just touched it, Chinyu likely wouldn't have recognized it. This was because besides this bone, there were countless other bones scattered around the stone walls. Looking at their appearance, some had died many years ago and had long been corroded by the passage of time. A casual touch would likely cause them to break into pieces. But there were also some whose blood hadn't yet faded. It was clear that they had died not too long ago. In fact, Chinyu even saw a corpse that hadn't completely rotted away. It was an ancient creature that resembled a wolf. It was extremely large, like a yak, and when it fell to the ground and died, there weren't any obvious signs of struggle. Chinyu immediately reacted. These ancient creatures that died here were likely killed by the illusory energy left behind by the 2 illusory world spiders after they died. If they couldn't break free from the illusory world, then they could only be trapped here forever. Their bodies would gradually weaken until they died. Suddenly, a cold intent gushed out from the depths of his heart. Chinyu stiffened and his complexion paled. He suddenly thought of something. After the illusory world spiders died, how could these 12 high-grade sources of life not be coveted? These corpses that had fallen to the ground were the clearest answer. In addition to this creature's corpse that hadn't completely rotted away. In other words, Chinyu, who had suddenly appeared in the stone cave, was likely already being stared at by some cold eyes hidden in the dark. It was just that he hadn't sensed it. And the owners of these eyes were probably a bit confused. They couldn't understand why such a small thing would suddenly fly out from the illusory world spider's stone cave. That wasn't right. They had probably seen the process of Chinyu being sucked in. They couldn't understand how he could still come out alive. But this wasn't important. What was important was that they couldn't be confused for too long. Since this small thing was safe and sound, didn't that mean that the terrifying illusory energy of the illusory world spider had finally dissipated? A trace of excitement gushed out from the depths of his heart. Instantly, his aura surged. Chinyu finally realized that something was wrong. He instantly felt as if there was a sharp light on his back. It made him feel as if he had fallen into an ice cave. Sure enough, his every move was being watched, and there were over a dozen gazes focused on him. And the most terrifying thing was that the owners of these gazes gave Qin Yu a great pressure, causing his complexion to change again and again. The so-called luck and misfortune were often decided in an instant. Just a moment ago, Qin Yu felt that this was a great surprise. But now, this surprise had turned into a nightmare that made him want to cry, but have no tears. If it was one or two ancient life forms, he might be able to deal with them. At the very least, he could escape. But with over a dozen gazes locked onto him, Qin Yu knew that he couldn't beat them. As for escaping, he probably couldn't escape either, because the owners of these gazes were scattered all around. There was no way to avoid them no matter where he went. As for whether or not these ancient life forms would let him go, Qin Yu only thought about it for a moment before he decisively extinguished this thought. What nonsense, what a simple logic. To a group of ancient life forms that clearly had a high spiritual intelligence, if you ran out from the illusion world spider's lair, do you think we would believe you if you said you didn't have any harvests? Thinking about it from another perspective, it wasn't hard to guess what these ancient life forms would do next. So, the moment Qin Yu felt a strange movement, he didn't hesitate. His figure moved, and he rushed towards the purple source of life closest to him. He had experienced this once before. As long as Qin Yu rushed in, the self-protection ability of the high-grade source of life would activate and he would directly leave. The distance was very close. He could do it in just a breath of time. But the moment Qin Yu moved, there was a loud roar. With a loud rumble, it was like thousands of thunderclaps exploding in his ears. Qin Yu spat out a mouthful of blood, and many parts of his body instantly ruptured. At the same time, the space in front of him suddenly twisted. A lifelike, translucent head appeared, opening its mouth wide to bite him. The power of space. An ancient life form could actually directly control the space rules that modern cultivators viewed as a benchmark for their own potential. It was simply terrifying. Qin Yu clenched his teeth and lifted a finger. With a loud crack, his entire finger exploded. The translucent head that was biting at him let out a roar of unwillingness as it twisted and dissipated. Qin Yu smoothly broke through the obstruction. But unfortunately, what he faced now wasn't just a single ancient life form. The moment that the head that was biting at him dissipated, a deep rumbling sound erupted above his head. In the next moment, a terrifying strength came crashing down like a million mountains, suppressing him. Before it had even struck him, the ground began to break apart and countless cracks appeared in it. Qin Yu stuffily coughed. His flesh, blood, and bones began to emit crackling sounds as blood flowed out from his head. At this time, he was only several steps away from the purple source of life. But these few steps were as difficult as a moat to cross. Whoosh, whoosh, with the sound of breaking air, dozens of tyrannical auras approached at an astonishing speed. They attacked again and again, but none of them triggered a counterattack from the illusory energy. They had already determined that the strength of the two illusion world spiders had been completely defeated. Then what was there to hesitate about? They would kill off these little insects and divide up the source of life here. The ancient life form's eyes were icy cold, burning hot, and filled with killing intent. They didn't discover that underneath his blood-red robes, even though Qin Yu's body was covered in cracks and bleeding from every orifice of his head, the truth was that his eyes were as calm as an ancient well in a deep mountain. He needed to remain calm in the face of danger. But what about in the face of life or death? Naturally, he needed to remain calm. At this time, his entire mind had entered into a state of indifference, as if he were detached from the outside world. What happened in front of him had nothing to do with him, so it couldn't affect him at all. A fluctuation spread out from Qin Yu's body. It was a bit difficult and cryptic, accompanied by the pitiful screams of the old turtle and the pained groans of the stone pagoda. Qin Yu's blood-red robes instantly turned incomparably bright red. It even gave off a feeling as if it were about to shine. The terrifying suppressive strength fell into a brief pause. Qin Yu's speed suddenly rose. Before the ancient life forms could regain their composure, he drilled into the source of life. Kacha! Kacha! The purple ice instantly formed. In a daze, Qin, you seemed to hear the enraged roars of the ancient life forms. This feeling was as if someone had taken advantage of the fact that they weren't at home and had taken away their wives and children. Was this really necessary? Wasn't it just a source of life? Even if it was light purple, wouldn't there be another one left? Not to mention there were still 10 others. What pity. If it weren't for these bastards, then this source of life would have been his, and he might have been able to solve the problem of his body of laws collapsing. But thinking about it, it seemed that these ancient life forms had coveted these sources of life for countless years. Countless lives had been lost, but an outsider like him had taken them first. Thinking of this, he was still unwilling, but most of it had dissipated. At least he was still alive. No more, you bastards. In a daze, Qin Yu stimulated his body of laws with all his strength to absorb the strength of the source of life. But this time, the strength contained within the source of life was far greater than Qin Yu had imagined. This was because it was far too durable. When Su Shi was here, the colors of the two sources of life were similar, and it didn't take long for their strength to be exhausted. Could it be because this was the lair of the illusory world spider, so the quality of the source of life was increased? Of course, this was only a guess. But what the reason was really wasn't important. Even if Qin Yu knew he was quenching his thirst with poison, he still needed a massive amount of strength, the more the better. This was because as long as he had enough strength, enough to cause a qualitative change, then Qin Yu's body of laws might be able to break down and reform, completely condensing. This was the conclusion that the old turtle and the stone tower came to after careful consideration. It should be highly credible. Moreover, so what if they didn't come to this conclusion? In Qin Yu's current state, if he didn't want to die, he could only desperately absorb it. The quality was really high. It hadn't dried up yet, but it still gave him a feeling as if there was still plenty of energy left. Vaguely, Qin Yu felt that something wasn't right. But at this time, there was no need to hesitate. No matter what, he would finish absorbing it first. Chapter 1274. When the illusory world spiders were alive, there were certainly no life forms that dared to have any thoughts of stealing them. But afterwards, when the illusory world spiders died, the 12 life sources were still fine. They were like 12 pieces of pork belly placed on a plate, causing the ancient life forms to drool. What happened afterwards proved that the illusory world spiders were worthy of being top terrifying life forms. Even though they were dead, they weren't to be provoked. Those fools that had fallen outside the source of life and turned into withered bones were the best evidence. Thus, for a very long period of time, even though everyone knew that there were 12 high-quality sources of life here, and they could even be seen from afar, no ancient era's organisms dared to take a step closer to them. They waited and waited. The endless flow of time could erode all. The illusory world spider's illusory energy was constantly dissipating. Eventually, it would be exhausted. Then, they waited until now. According to the judgment of the ancient life forms, there wasn't much illusory energy left. This immediately attracted countless burning gazes. Outside the illusory world spider's cave, there were 12 life sources. This wasn't a secret. Nearly all ancient life forms knew of this. This also meant that the Black Cloud Wolf King, who had been forced to retreat 3 months ago and was no longer qualified to guard this place, was unwilling to give up after waiting for so many years. It gritted its teeth and charged into the illusory spider grotto, eventually dying inside. What filled its place was a mighty bear king that came from some unknown place. Its terrifying strength caused the other ancient life forms to feel dread, and they tacitly agreed that it had a place here. But today, the 12 primordial creatures who had fought so hard and defeated so many powerful enemies finally ran out of their illusory chi and were about to harvest their harvest, were all robbed by a strange little thing that came out of nowhere. How could they tolerate this? Yes, there was no mistake. This wasn't a single life source, but the 12 powerful ancient life forms that guarded it had all become useless. This was because when Qin Yu stepped into the purple life source closest to him, something unexpected occurred. No one knew, not even these 12 ancient life forms. It turned out that the 12 life sources outside the illusory world spider cave were actually a single entity. In other words, they were connected to each other. Perhaps it was because of this that the two terrifying illusory world spiders decided to live together and establish a cave in this place. One day, when the 12 sources of life completed their transformations and reached the purple grade, they would enjoy this fortune together. 12 sources of life were enough for them to enter together. Unfortunately, for some unknown reason, two powerful illusory world spiders had died, and they had not been able to enter until today. Under normal circumstances, such a long period of time should have been enough for the source of life to evolve to a purple grade. However, perhaps it was due to the fact that the 12 source of life had been born as a single entity, causing their overall strength to increase very slowly. Up until now, only two of them had completed their evolution. But this wasn't the important point. The important point was that as Qin entered, one of the purple life sources and the other 11 life sources also froze over. It froze. Just like that, they instantly sealed themselves before the 12 powerful ancient era's organisms and entered a masterful state. Seeing the scene in front of them, the 12 powerful ancient era's organisms even had the thought of swallowing Qin alive. That was why they had let out that extremely angry roar that Qin had vaguely heard before. The only thing that comforted them was that, perhaps because they were born as a single entity, after the two purple life sources shook, they didn't move away. Otherwise, if they were to watch helplessly as Qin left with the 12 life sources, they would definitely go crazy. As for now, they would wait here. They would wait for the little thing that had stolen their life sources to come out and grind his bones to ashes. But this would likely only exist in their imaginations. That was because the greatest possibility was that the little thing would explode from overeating. 12 life sources born as a single entity, this was a situation that had never been heard of before. No one knew just how much strength was contained within them. But without a doubt, it was an unimaginably terrifying level. Just how could that little thing from just now swallow it? If it couldn't swallow it, it would explode to death. The ancient era's organisms naturally didn't care about Qin life or death. But he was related to the 12 life sources. Under normal circumstances, if a life form that intruded upon a life source was unable to withstand the explosion, all of its strength would gather together once more, forming a seed of a life source that would grow and be born once more. But the key point was that this seed would scatter through the various worlds under the influence of the Lost Gardens rules. No one could predict where it would descend. In other words, if Qin exploded and died, the 12 life sources would also be destroyed with him. They would no longer have anything to do with him. In fact, Qin would explode to death, and they wouldn't even have a chance to vent the anger in their hearts. Just thinking about this was enough to make the ancient era's organisms go crazy. And among them, the ones with the most ugly expressions were the sky-shaking Lion King and the newly arrived Herculean Bear King. When Qin rushed towards the purple life sources, he just happened to be where they were. According to the agreement between the 12 ancient life forms, they needed to suppress him. But what was the result? Two great beast kings joined forces and still weren't able to stop that little thing. They could only watch helplessly as he rushed in and destroyed the 12 life sources. If it weren't for the two of them, they would have fallen with everyone else. If it weren't for the fact that the sky-shaking Lion King and the Herculean Bear King were both very strong, an internal struggle would have erupted. This was especially true for the Herculean Bear King. As a new beast king from the outside world, it had forcefully seized the position of Black Cloud Wolf King, so it was the most disliked. Now that it had been intercepted by Qin, the other ancient life forms couldn't help but think that if Black Cloud was still alive, perhaps this wouldn't have happened. After all, its speed was the fastest amongst the beast kings, and it might have been able to stop Qin first. Although the truth was already set in stone and it couldn't be changed, it didn't stop them from looking at the Herculean Bear King with increasingly unfriendly gazes. This unfriendly gazes nearly caused the Herculean Bear King to grind his teeth to pieces. But he could only endure it. He was strong, but it was impossible for him to contend with the other beast kings. If a conflict erupted, he would definitely suffer. Thinking back and forth, the anger that had nowhere to vent was concentrated on Chinyu. It was all that damned little bug's fault. If it weren't for him, things wouldn't have reached this stage. With his strength, it was highly likely that he would have been the first to seize a life source. At that time, everything would have been his. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. The Herculean Bear King's eyes turned red, and his heavy breathing rumbled in his chest. It sounded like rolling thunder in the clouds. Don't die. You little thing, you mustn't die. I'll let you have a taste of despair and terror. Of course, Chinyu didn't die. Not only that, but his condition was much better. The endless power of his life source was actually able to barely suppress the signs of his body of laws collapsing. It could be seen that a thick layer of tape had been wrapped around Chinyu's body, tightly binding him together. Although the power of his life source was still pouring into his body, Chinyu had an intuition in his heart. The power of his life source alone wasn't enough. It wasn't that there wasn't enough. To be honest, the amount of power contained within this purple life source far surpassed Chinyu's expectations. It was as if an opening had been made in a great river. It was simply inexhaustible. It was the lack of quality. The level of his life source wasn't enough for Chinyu's body of laws to complete its transformation. He needed a higher level of power. The source of life was an extraordinary life source that even the Yardmaster had mentioned. Yet, it wasn't enough at all. Every time he thought of this, Chinyu couldn't help but smile bitterly. Then, he gained a clearer understanding of the situation he was facing. Fortunately, although the source of life couldn't completely solve the problem, it could temporarily suppress it. At the very least, Chinyu would be able to stay in a normal state for a long period of time. He wouldn't be bleeding all over at the slightest movement. He couldn't be greedy. This was already a very good result. The old turtle had also told the stone tower that there was a great secret hidden in this mountain. Perhaps this secret was the key to eradicating the hidden dangers of his body of laws. Once he absorbed all the power of the source of life here, he might as well seriously investigate it. But the problem was, when would he finish absorbing it? It couldn't really be endless after he opened his mouth on the river, right? Although the possibility of his body of laws exploding was extremely small, given how powerful his body of laws was, the Lost Garden would still close. Chinyu didn't want to find that he was the only cultivator left in this forgotten ancient world with countless ancient creatures as his companions. Luckily, Chinyu's worries didn't become a reality, because even if there really was an opening in the Great River, as long as one's appetite was great enough, they could still eat and drink it clean. Moreover, the strength of the 12 source of life wasn't infinite at all. It was only that they had existed for a long enough time, and because they were born together, their accumulations were far deeper than other source of lives, thus giving Chinyu this misconception. Kacha! Kacha! This was the ice shattering. This meant that the protection of the Lost Garden's laws for the owner of the source of life had come to an end. Shwa! Chinyu opened his eyes. Beneath his blood-red robes, a sharp light erupted. He was finally going to leave. He hoped that his luck would be better and that it wouldn't be the same as when he first entered this mountain, falling into a trap before he could clearly see anything. With a thought, he leapt out from the hole. Then, the entire world fell silent. Chinyu blinked again and again. After determining that what he saw wasn't an illusion, his entire body froze. How could this be? The purple source of life hadn't moved away. He had met the 12 ancient life forms in front of him once more. Subconsciously thinking about the thoughts he just had, Chinyu felt a bitter taste in his mouth. Could it be that his luck had completely run out? He would rather fall into a trap than face these 24 fiendishly grinning eyes in front of him. Heavens, earth, this world, towards you, I have the deepest love in the world. I thank you for allowing this little thing to appear in front of me once more. This was probably the same thought that the 12 ancient life forms were having at this time. To force a group of cruel and ruthless beast kings to sigh in such a sour manner. It was clear just how severe the damage Chinyu had done to them was. Luckily, it didn't matter. they would eventually have a chance to take everything back. You ate mine, spit it out. You took mine, hand it over, and then, bit by bit, I'll flay your skin, pull out your tendons, and grind your flesh and bones into dregs. The Herculean bear king laughed lowly. It stood up like a human and slapped its two thick and solid forelimbs together, producing muffled sounds of pa-pa. Sharp claws were revealed amidst the cracking of its joints. Coupled with its current laughter, it was simply terrifying. This place was far too dangerous. Qin Yu was incomparably sure that he couldn't stay here any longer. Escape. He had to escape. He had to escape now. Illusory world spider. With a loud shout, he took out a skeleton and fiercely threw it out. With a loud bang, the skeleton exploded. The little remaining illusory energy was immediately released, turning into the phantom of an illusory world spider that opened its mouth and roared. The 12 ancient life forms that were about to pounce on him were clearly frightened. They rapidly drew back. There was nothing they could do about it. The illusory world spider was far too terrifying. Perhaps its main body wasn't too strong, but its incomparably terrifying illusory energy made it a nearly undefeatable existence. Anyone that bumped into it would die, but the illusory energy in a bone could only simulate its appearance. After roaring once more, it would be exhausted. The ancient life forms that were frightened away, the 12 solemn beast king level existences, immediately roared into the heavens, their eyes turning red. You bastard, just you wait. After I catch you, I'll let you understand what it means to regret ever being born into this world. Chase him, kill him. Bang, bang, the 12 beast kings hurtled forwards together. Their momentum shook the heavens and earth. They galvanized the vast strength of the world, tumbling about like raging waves. Qin Yu's scalp tingled and his heart tightened. He thought, just what is going on? I only took one source of life. Do you really have to? I didn't pay too much attention just now, but it seems that all the sources of life here have been exhausted. He suddenly had a foreboding premonition. Although Qin Yu didn't know what it meant to live together, as he thought back to the endless source of life that had left him confused and even worried, he felt his throat go dry. If all of this was truly done by him, then the commotion this time around would truly be too big. It was no wonder that the group of powerful ancient era's organisms would have that sort of appearance earlier. Their eyes were fixed on Chu Feng, and it was as if they were about to cry tears of joy. Run, hurry and run. As he clenched his teeth, Qin Yu fiercely pulled back his hand and threw out another bone. At the same time, he roared out loud, "Illusory world spider, heed my call and descend." Bang! The bone exploded and illusory energy erupted. Another illusory world spider phantom appeared. Although it had already suffered the same loss just now, it was still able to hear Qin Yu's roar. However, after hearing Qin Yu's roar, coupled with the sudden appearance of the illusory world spider, the 12 beast kings, who were charging over aggressively, suddenly paused. Then, the phantom shattered. They had been played. Moreover, in a short period of time, this little thing had used the same method to play with them twice in a row. Oh, damn. You bastard, you must be thoroughly killed. Feeling the knife-like gazes behind him, Qin Yu's scalp tingled. He lowered his head and ran even faster. Closer. Shwa. Qin Yu leapt up and jumped into the cave entrance. This had been his goal from the very start. Otherwise, in terms of escaping speed, he would never have been able to escape. It had to be known that among the 12 ancient life forms, there was one that looked similar to a monkey. It was just that it was much larger and seemed to be an expert at running away. It definitely couldn't compare to it. If he was delayed, even if it was only for a breath of time, it would be enough for the other ancient life forms to surround him. Then, he would become a piece of meat on the chopping block, waiting to be slaughtered. Of course, Qin Yu wasn't suicidal. The reason he escaped into the cave was because he had discovered a crack in the ground when he was dismantling the illusory world spider corpses. It was very deep, and the interior was very complex. Even with Qin Yu's divine sense, he wasn't able to clearly investigate it. So, Qin Yu didn't hesitate to extinguish his curiosity. But now, he had no other choice. This was a path to survival. Even though Chin didn't know where this crack hidden beneath the two illusory world spider corpses led to. An illusory world spider's cave, this little thing had rushed in, so it definitely wasn't suicidal. Was there a problem inside? As this thought appeared, the 12 Beast Kings paused. It was also this pause that caused them to completely cut off the possibility of keeping Chin here. When they rushed into the cave, they just happened to see Chin drill into the crack in the ground, disappearing in front of them in the blink of an eye. Angry roars came from far behind him. Then, there was a loud rumbling sound that caused the entire crack to shake. Chin looked back and immediately cursed. This group of ancient life forms could actually change their size and were very flexible. Now all of them had shrunk their bodies and were swarming in. Luckily, there was a limit to how much they could shrink, and the crack in the ground was very narrow, so it could slow them down. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Behind him, there was a series of crashing sounds that reverberated through the ground, making one's head dizzy. Chin clenched his teeth, and like a big fish, he ran down the narrow path. "I can't stop you bastards." Chapter 1275. Being chased by a group of berserk ancient life forms and having to flee in a sorry state wasn't something to be happy about. But when this matter was related to life and death, and if he didn't escape he would die, so he wasn't in the mood to think about such things. For instance, right now Chin only hated himself for not having 2 more legs. He couldn't run fast enough, probably because they hated Chin to the extreme and swore to turn his bones to ashes. The 12 powerful ancient life forms used all their strength to chase after him. Fortunately, this mountain was hard enough and the cracks in the ground were narrow. Thus, he was able to maintain a certain distance from them. The cracks in the ground twisted and turned and didn't move in a straight line. In addition, Chin only cared about where the cracks were narrow, so he couldn't tell which direction to go. He couldn't even estimate how far down he had gone, but it was definitely very deep. These bastards still didn't give up. Chin gasped for breath. He looked back. Because of this movement, his speed slowed down a little. Then, with a whoosh, something seemed to brush past the tip of his nose, bringing with it an icy cold aura. The hairs on his back stood up, and Chin face stiffened. He came to a sudden stop and turned to look at the cracks. The darkness couldn't obstruct his vision. In fact, it helped him see more clearly. Then, he discovered a beetle with a shell that was almost exactly the same as the rocks in the cracks. If he hadn't barely caught a trace of it just now, it would have looked like a protruding piece of rock. It was because of this that he was able to hide it from Chin's eyes. As for the thing that brushed past his nose, looking at the front of the beetle and its 2 thin cicada wings, Chin's scalp went numb and his complexion turned even uglier. If it weren't for the fact that he had glanced back just now, causing his speed to slow down a little, that strike would have likely struck his head. Although the 2 front limbs of the beetle looked extremely thin, as if they could be snapped in half with just a gentle pinch of 2 fingers, the front limbs of the beetle looked extremely thin. But the truth wasn't like that. Just a glance was enough to make Chin's heart turn cold. It must have been extremely sharp, so sharp that if he hadn't been lucky, his head would have been split in half. And just like that, he had almost died. The lingering fear washed over him like a tide. Once again, Chin experienced the terror of this mountain. If you're not careful, even a small bug can take your life. The beetle that was discovered stubbornly stared at Chin with its eyes. It screeched and threw itself at him. "You little thing, you've got guts. You almost succeeded in playing dirty. Do you really think I can kill you so easily?" In his annoyance, Chin lifted a hand and grasped forwards. The darkness immediately awakened, wrapping around him like a living creature. The beetle's screams became even louder. Its front limbs quickly danced about, their speed astonishing, cutting the darkness into countless pieces. It was indeed very sharp, but unfortunately, the darkness itself was incorporeal. Even if it was cut apart, it could fuse back together in the next moment, layer after layer stacking on top of one another, completely imprisoning it. With a thought, the darkness shrank inward, forming a strangling strength. But soon he gasped in surprise. This beetle had such a sturdy shell. It was actually very difficult to crush it in a short time. "Master, wait a moment." The stone tower suddenly spoke. The old turtle's heart sank. His first thought was that this fellow was going to show off again, and the facts proved that his guess was correct. The stone tower said in a low voice, "If I'm not wrong, this is a subway beetle. It is a type of ancient life form with super-killing power and astonishing defensive capabilities. It is also one of the favorite prey of the illusion world spider." Qin Yu's eyes flashed. If this was the case, then it could be explained. The cracks in the illusion world spider cave should have been used to capture subway beetles. But why would those two incomparably powerful illusion world spiders, existences that stood at the top of the food chain, die at the same time in the cracks? But now clearly wasn't the time to consider these things. Qin Yu said, "Are you saying that we can use the subway beetles?" The stone tower said, "Master is wise. The illusion world spider is the nemesis of the subway beetles. Just a trace of their aura is enough to scare them away. As long as we can find their lair and lure the 12 ancient life forms over, they can only pray for their own good." "Good idea." Qin Yu's eyes brightened. He immediately frowned. "The cracks in the ground are complex and intricate. How can we find the subway beetle's lair?" The old turtle howled inwardly. He thought that he was done for. Now that you asked this question, that damn stone tower was going to show off again. If he dared to suggest this, then he definitely had a way. Otherwise, this wouldn't be called a show, but an idiot who had picked up a stone and smashed his own foot. Sure enough, he guessed right again. The stone tower lightly said, "Besides having strong offensive and defensive capabilities, the subway beetle is also one of its characteristics. It won't allow itself to suffer any losses. As long as Master releases this subway beetle and follows behind it, you will naturally be able to find its lair." He paused for a moment and continued to say, "However, in terms of time, Master will need to consider it. It is best to dig a hole in one go, otherwise they will become smarter." Qin Yu's lips curled up. That's right. His eyes flashed. He stared at the trapped subway beetle in the darkness. "Little fellow, I'll have to rely on you." With a thought, the darkness was dispelled. The subway beetle screeched and glared at Qin Yu before turning to leave. It was likely saying, "Brat, don't leave if you have the guts. See if I don't go back home and call for help to deal with you." Seeing this, Qin Yu was overjoyed. He thought that not only would he not leave, but he would also take the initiative to apologize to them. In order to show his sincerity, he had brought 12 congratulatory gifts. It would be best if they could accept them and have a good meal. However, as the stone tower said, he still needed to consider the time carefully so that the trap would be perfect. Qin Yu's figure flickered, and he followed behind the subway beetle. At the same time, his eyes flashed, and the smile on his face became even wider. He would do this. If he blocked them a little, he could continue to provoke them and make them so angry that they wouldn't have time to think about anything else. He lifted a hand and pressed it behind him. The darkness moved with his thoughts, forming invisible reefs that fell down wherever he passed. Soon, there were loud crashing sounds behind him, accompanied by the angry roars of ancient life forms. Provocation. This was a naked provocation. They were being chased by the 12 Beast Kings, and yet they still dared to play tricks on them. That's right. The reefs condensed from the power of darkness weren't enough to cause any substantial damage to the 12 Beast Kings. At most, they would only be able to slow them down a little. But even so, things couldn't be understood this way. No matter how one looked at it, they were the ones who were stupid enough to crash into the reefs. This couldn't be tolerated. Capture him. They had to capture him. Even if he fled to the ends of the earth, they wouldn't let him go. The 12 Beast Kings roared in their hearts and began to move even faster. Qin Yu lightly coughed. He rubbed his temples, thinking that in terms of stirring up trouble, he had probably reached the peak. Just a little trick from him was enough to achieve unexpected results. Luckily, he could stir up trouble, and he also had the ability to calm things down. "You angry beasts, hurry up and follow me." The The subway beetle was already impatient. But in the end, Qin Yu arrived first. The subway beetle that had been leading them all the way opened its mouth and screamed. It was unprecedentedly loud, as if it wanted to vent all the anger in its heart. Arrogant, this strange fellow behind, it was simply arrogant to the extreme. He actually dared to follow it all the way to its home. If it weren't for the fact that it was certain that it wasn't Qin Yu's match, the subway beetle swore that it would have already turned around and fought Qin Yu to the death. But now, your arrogance has come to an end. No matter who you are, no matter how strong you are, as long as you come to our home, you will be finished. Walala! Countless subway beetles emerged from the densely packed cave. It was impossible to count their number, and they occupied every corner of Qin Yu's line of sight. In truth, although Qin Yu was prepared, he was still shocked by the scene in front of him, and his heart skipped a beat. He thought that if the stone tower was wrong and the illusion world spider's aura was useless, then he would probably send himself a cold song. Without any hesitation, Qin Yu's palm flashed. It was unknown whether it was black or red, but the illusion world spider's head appeared in his palm. With a thought, he poured his strength into it. The remnant illusory energy within the skull gushed out, and the aura of the illusion world spider immediately radiated outwards. Qin Yu could clearly see that the densely packed subway beetles on the other side were all dumbfounded at this moment, truly dumbfounded. They all froze in place, and then uncontrollably, fear gushed out from their eyes. The suppression of the food chain caused fear to rise from the depths of their souls. It was simply impossible to suppress. Thus, the air suddenly fell silent. It was effective. Qin Yu quietly let out a breath. Then, he clenched his teeth and stepped forwards. The subway beetles that were scared stiff retreated like a tide, not daring to stop him in the slightest. They stared at Qin Yu with horror in their eyes as he swaggered through and appeared on the other side of their lair. Rumble, 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 the loud sounds rapidly approached. The 12 ancient life forms were already very close. As they felt Qin Yu's slowly moving aura, their first thought was that he had encountered trouble. This was simply a heaven-sent opportunity. Let's see where this bastard will run to. Feeling the rising aura of the ancient life forms and the even louder sounds of collisions, Qin Yu's lips curved up. Enjoy it. I hope you all have a good time. He turned and left. Before leaving, he didn't forget to release his aura and stab out once more. The 12 ancient life forms wildly rushing towards him caused their roars to rise to a whole new level. A stone blocking the way was instantly smashed to pieces. The first to rush out was the Herculean Bear King, determined to use the blood of that little insect to wash away the humiliation of a king. It just happened to see Qin Yu's back as he turned around. He seemed to be reaching out a hand and waving it several times. This bastard, he must die. Its eyes widened and it forcefully swallowed the roar it was about to roar. As the Herculean Bear King stared at the dense mass of subway beetles, its eyes began to turn red. It felt as if its heart would stop beating. Then, the other 11 beast kings following closely behind it all fell into a stupefied state as they saw the army of subway beetles. They had been tricked. This was without a doubt. But they no longer had the time to feel anger and annoyance. The only thought that filled their minds was to escape. Nonsense. Of course they would escape. The Herculean Bear King was the first to turn around. Then, the moment it turned around, the roars of the subway beetle army rang out behind it. Bullying insects too far. This was simply bullying insects too far. As the overlords of the underground, the subway beetles refused to suffer even the slightest loss. This was built on the foundation of their incomparably formidable strength. They had always been the ones chasing after people. When had they ever been chased into their lair and not dare to move? They had even taken the initiative to give way, allowing others to walk right through them. Humiliation. This was an absolute humiliation. But the aura of the illusory world spider was far too terrifying, so terrifying that they didn't even dare to think of resisting it. Thus, all of this humiliation and anger was vented on the heads of the 12 ancient life forms in front of them. These insects on the surface actually dared to attack their lair. They had to kill them to establish their might. Otherwise, where would the dignity and status of the subway beetle race be? The subway beetle army rushed out in full force. The 12 beast kings fled in terror, causing a great commotion. Chinyu stopped and listened for a moment. Then he shook his head in disappointment. He thought that the majestic 12 beast kings of the surface didn't even dare to resist. This was simply too shameful. But he never thought that he would also take out the illusory world spider's head. Cough, cough, forget it. Let's not laugh at each other anymore. He rubbed his chin and looked at the ugly illusory world spider's head. Chinyu was satisfied. Indeed, the principle of not wasting was correct. If he hadn't taken away these bones, how could he have solved this problem so easily? Good stuff. This was good stuff. Chinyu smiled. He thought for a moment and decided to play it safe. He would go a bit further before putting away the illusory world spider's head. He didn't want those narrow-minded subway beetles to catch up to him and plot against him again. He turned and walked away. In a good mood, Chinyu didn't know that as the subway beetle army rushed out in full force to chase down the 12 beast kings, in the deepest depths of the lair, there was a cave that had been sealed for countless years. Suddenly, there was a loud cracking sound. Then, pairs of green eyes lit up in the darkness. Over a dozen strange subway beetles that were nearly twice as large and crimson all over drilled out. Their noses twitched as if they were trying to identify something. Then, they screamed and their crimson carapaces opened up. Two blood-red wings drilled out and flapped as they howled out. Their speed was astonishing as they chased after the direction Chinyu had left in. If any race wanted to exist for a long time, they had to maintain a constant flow of evolution and self-transformation. They had to work hard to make up for their own flaws and make their race system more perfect. Only then could their bloodline continue in this cruel world. The subway beetles were no exception. Thus, in the endless years, they had been trying to rid themselves of the nightmare of the illusory world spider. For this reason, they had made countless attempts. Then, step by step, they managed to cultivate a race variant called the anti-hunter. They were the subway beetles, and they hid their greatest secret. Unless they faced the illusory world spider, they would never appear. But the illusory world spider had disappeared for far too long. It had been so long that the subway beetles had already forgotten about these anti-hunter variant. Most of them had already died, but there were still some that had survived until today in a deep slumber. Now, the aura of the illusory world spider had appeared once more. They could finally awaken. Chinyu was in a very distressed state right now. He didn't know where these strange subway beetles with glowing green eyes had come from, but they didn't fear the aura of the illusory world spider at all. Instead, after he took out the skull, they became even more excited and crazily rushed towards him without any fear of death. Compared to ordinary illusory world spiders, they were much larger and possessed greater strength and speed. At the same time, their crimson carapaces had an even more astonishing defensive power. Luckily, there were only a dozen or so of them. If he had seen the endless scene from before, Chinyu would have died long ago. But even so, it was very difficult to avoid their pursuit. Not only did these exotic mirage spiders run very fast and jump shockingly fast, the most exaggerated thing was that they had evolved a pair of wings. The wings were silent, but it was enough to increase their already astonishing speed by another level. The stone tower was depressed. It never imagined that this would be a great chance for it to raise its position in Chinyu's heart. Just as it was about to succeed, such an accident would occur. Subway beetles, these little things had actually evolved into a variant that specifically targeted the illusory world spider. The old turtle was secretly happy for a moment, but he soon discovered that if Chinyu encountered danger, there wouldn't be any benefits for him. If he died, the stone tower would at most fall into a deep slumber in the darkness once more. But you would have to be buried with him. How could he be happy like this? Happy my ass. Chapter 1276. Damned Stone Pagoda. You were the one who started this. Hurry up and think of a way to resolve this. Otherwise, if something happens to Master, I will drag you down with me." The old turtle screamed out in exasperation. He was truly panicking. The subway beetles were extremely terrifying. Yu's blood-red robe could be seen as condensed from the fire laws, but even it couldn't resist. It was easily torn apart, leaving behind long wounds. Although these wounds could be healed in the blink of an eye, ants could bite an elephant to death. If there were too many small wounds, they could ignite the hidden dangers of his suppressed body of rules. Moreover, it was clear that these subway beetles were becoming increasingly strong with the passage of time. Their attack methods were becoming increasingly sharp and cunning. It was like they were rapidly adapting to this world. As for Yu, although he could send the subway beetles flying away every time he attacked, their defenses were too terrifying and their vitality was tenacious. They simply couldn't be killed. The stone pagoda bitterly smiled. "If I had a way, I would have already done so. The imprisoning strength of this mountain has already covered us. If we dare to resist, we will immediately be suppressed. Master, you can only rely on yourself this time. Don't fight with these subway beetles and think of a way to get rid of them. Otherwise, you will only be dragged down." Yu took a deep breath. He didn't blame the stone pagoda. The existence of the subway beetles was only an accident. Indeed, the world changed quickly. Not too long ago, he was sighing that taking away the skeleton of the illusion world spider was the right decision, and he was secretly pleased with himself. And the result? Not long after his voice fell, he was chased down by the illusion world spider. In this world, nothing could be predicted. He lifted a hand and grasped forwards. Darkness began to boil, like a tsunami in the deep sea. Countless undercurrents surged without end. All of the subway beetles were wrapped up in the turbulent darkness. Layers upon layers of entanglement, sealing them within. Puff! Dense muffled sounds rang out one after another, giving off the feeling that an incomparably sharp blade had cut through a thick pile of sackcloth. It was extremely clean and efficient. Not even the slightest bit of obstruction could be created. Yu closed his eyes and shouted out, "Light!" In the next moment, from deep underground that had been shrouded in darkness for countless years, a trillion beams of light burst out like arrows, instantly tearing apart everything. Darkness and light were two sides of the same coin to begin with, and they could transform into each other. Yu, who grasped light and darkness as one, might not be able to reverse the yin and yang with a single thought, but he was able to turn this entire region into day. The effect was unexpectedly good. The eyes of the subway beetle, which had lived deep underground for generations without any light, were as fragile as an eggshell under the light. Even the mutant subway beetle could not make up for this flaw. Caught off guard, he let out a blood-curdling scream. His eyes, which were protected by the transparent shell, immediately turned crimson. His tiny blood vessels rapidly swelled up, and with a bang, they exploded. Thus, Yu placed a large mass of light in the ground, blinding all the alien metal insects that were chasing after him. The only bad thing was that although the subway beetle's eyes were crucial, its sense of smell was equally sharp, accounting for half of its perception. Therefore, even though he couldn't see and was suffering from the pain of his eyeball exploding, he still screamed and chased after him. Yu tried to throw out some illusion spider skeletons in an attempt to disperse these subway beetles and even get rid of their pursuit. But it was unknown whether it was because they hated Yu to the core, or because they had locked onto his scent and believed that he should be killed the most, but the subway beetles chased relentlessly, not falling for his trick at all. This made Yu feel helpless. The blind subway beetle was also not easy to deal with. Moreover, he was worried that he would be dragged down by these horrifying underground creatures that were about to go crazy and perish together with them. It wasn't that Yu was thinking too much, but that he really could feel from these subway beetles that they didn't hesitate to perish together with the enemy. In the chase, he ran aimlessly. Yu didn't know where he was, so he didn't care if he got even more lost. But the problem was that there were terrifying subway beetles underground. So there was a possibility that there were other underground creatures as well. If he ran into another one, That would be a big joke. He couldn't get rid of them, nor could he kill them. This caused Qin Yu to frown, a bitter smile on his face. Because he had almost been ambushed by the subway beetle and had his head cut open, Qin Yu was now very cautious. Wherever he went, darkness surged, taking everything into his perception. Thus, when that abrupt and dazzling silver root appeared in front of him, Qin Yu immediately discovered it. To tell the truth, discovering a root underground was a very common thing. After all, as long as it was a root, it would definitely stay in the mud and stone. But this time was different. The moment he saw the silver root, Qin Yu's heart shrank. Fear flooded his mind like tide. At the same time, an intense hatred and desire to destroy appeared in his heart. He tried to drive Qin Yu to completely destroy it. But in the end, fear suppressed everything. Qin Yu came to a sudden stop and tried to retreat to another crack, but it was too late. The pursuing mutant iron-ground insects flapped their wings and swarmed over, blocking off this path of retreat. Although they couldn't see Qin Yu, their keen sense of smell was enough. The subway beetles locked onto his position and crazily rushed over. The sudden burst of light caused their eyes to turn bloodshot, completely arousing their ferocious nature. Before they even approached Qin Yu, terrifying fluctuations were already emitting from their bodies. Qin Yu's complexion changed, and he groaned inwardly. These subway beetles really did have the thought of dying together with him. They actually wanted to self-destruct as soon as they arrived. Now that there was no way to avoid it, he could only forcefully endure it in this crack. At this time, a silver light flashed in front of him. Then there was a shrill scream. The scene in front of him caused Qin Yu's pupils to violently shrink. He saw that the subway beetle at the very front had its body pierced through, and what had done this was a silver root-like object. Moreover, it looked somewhat familiar. Dong! His heart raced. Qin Yu felt his throat tighten. He carefully glanced around, and his complexion changed. There was actually something like this. This unknown root in front of him had grasped the rules of space. A root that had grasped the rules of space. This was really something. The silver root that Qin Yu had seen just now was now taut and taut. But the tip of the root was nowhere to be seen. Then it appeared in front of the unfortunate subway beetle and mercilessly pierced through its body. The shrill screams came to an abrupt end. The subway beetle that had its body pierced suddenly withered away. This process was incomparably abrupt, like a deflated balloon. Then, the last thin layer of its body shattered. But this wasn't the end. Rather, it was the beginning of the slaughter. The silver root didn't pause at all. It suddenly vanished. Then, in the next moment, a second subway beetle was pierced through. Like the first one, it was sucked dry and turned to slag. Even though they had been tricked and turned blind, the metal insects that had chased after Qin Yu were now nothing more than chickens and dogs. In front of the silver roots, they couldn't even withstand a single blow and were swept away in the blink of an eye. After killing the last subway beetle, the surface of the silver root was a bit brighter than before. But there wasn't any obvious change. It was as if these subway beetles were nothing more than appetizers to it. They couldn't even be considered extra points. This thing had a really good appetite. Qin Yu's forehead tightened. He tried to restrain his aura. This was because after the silver root finished its slaughter, it hadn't returned to its original position. Instead, it seemed to have been hooked and was looking for other prey. And in this place, the only one that could be called prey was Qin Yu. The silver roots looked as if they were floating in the water, casually stretching out. Every root knot was swaying gently, looking weak and harmless. In addition to the silver-white color, from afar, it looked like a big furry tail. It actually gave off a very cute feeling. As someone who had personally witnessed the silver root easily slaughter over a dozen subway beetles, Qin Yu wished he could slap himself and wake up. This terrifying thing that could casually pierce through him and suck him dry was actually cute. He feared he had gone insane. It can't find me. It can't find me. The heavens couldn't hear Qin Yu's prayers. The silver root suddenly vanished from his line of sight. In the next moment, he froze in place. because at this moment, tiny silver roots were quietly drilling out from behind him, wrapping around it bit by bit. Chinyu had never been someone who would sit and wait for death. At this time, his first thought was to resist, but to his horror and anger, he discovered that he couldn't move. The moment the silver root wrapped around him, it was as if it had been activated. An incomparably terrifying seal completely suppressed him, let alone resisting. He couldn't even blink or move a finger. A faint chill constantly spread through his body. The silver root was soft and cold. As it touched the exposed flesh on his neck, it felt soft and slippery, like a poisonous snake wrapped around his body. But it was clear that it was far more terrifying than a poisonous snake. Tiny silver roots wrapped around his neck and appeared in front of Chinyu. They wove together, forming the outline of an eye. It was slightly narrowed, and although it was only formed from interweaving roots, it gave off an incomparably vivid feeling. One could clearly feel the mockery and ridicule it conveying. It was as if it were saying, "I knew you were here. I just thought it was fun, so I'll let you live a little longer. Do you feel fear and despair now? That's right, this is what I'm playing with, this is what I want." The eye formed from interweaving roots was very close to Chinyu's eyes, so close that there was only a finger's distance between them. Thus, he could clearly see the slightest emotional changes in this eye. This is bad, it's going to kill him. In the next moment, the silver eye in front of Chinyu began to break apart from the outside, drilling into his eyeball. Only the middle pupil was left behind, as if it wanted to appreciate just how miserable his death would be. Chapter 1277. Just as the tip of the silver root system was about to drill into Chinyu's eye, the remaining pupil suddenly turned lax, as if it had lost all consciousness. The sealing's strength instantly vanished, and Chinyu regained control of his body. Without hesitation, he grabbed the silver root system and threw it far away. Then, he rapidly drew backwards. After leaving the crack in the earth, he turned and rushed into another one. During this entire process, he didn't pause at all as he erupted with his fastest speed. Although he didn't know why the silver root system had suddenly become absent-minded, there was one point that Chinyu didn't doubt. What he needed to do now was run as far away as possible. Terrifying, this was far too terrifying. Just what was that silver root system? Not only did it control the rules of space, but it also possessed such a horrifying, imprisoning strength. After being entangled by it, he wasn't able to resist at all. Behind him, there was only silence without the least bit of sound. But within Chinyu's chest, his heart was still beating rapidly. It was so fast that one couldn't help but feel a strong sense of oppression. This feeling, the greatest possibility, was that Chinyu still hadn't been able to completely escape from danger. In other words, it was likely that the silver root system was chasing him from behind. Thinking of this, the oppressive feeling in his heart became even stronger. Chinyu paled and clenched his teeth, increasing his speed a little more. This would cause some damage to him and increase the burden on his body of rules. It might even cause a hidden danger of collapse. But in the current situation, Chinyu couldn't care too much about this. Otherwise, if the silver root system caught up to him, he would die without a doubt. He madly ran forwards. The only thing he was glad about was that the journey went smoothly and he didn't encounter any accidents. Otherwise, he really would have cried. After an unknown period of time and passing through countless cracks in the earth, the invisible oppression behind him finally vanished. Within Chinyu's chest, his rapidly beating heart gradually calmed down. But he didn't dare to be careless. He continued running for some more time before he finally stopped and gasped for breath. Puff! Chinyu spat out a mouthful of blood. He covered it with his sleeves and ordered the purple-back blue-wing ants to absorb it all. Then, he carefully wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth and stood up. The cracks in the earth in front of him had undergone a tremendous change. It was like they had been infected by the darkness of the underground world, revealing a nearly pure black color. He didn't have time to think too much about it. He carefully looked around and determined there weren't any dangers. Then he sat down on a protruding stone and rested. It was true. He rested for a moment and didn't dare to stay here any longer. He rose up and continued on his way. However, he didn't know where he would go next or where he would arrive. Cheney took a deep breath and furrowed his eyebrows together. It was only now that he had escaped danger that he had time to think. He was completely lost. Furthermore, he had been running around aimlessly, so he had no idea where he was. Going back, Cheney looked up at the crack that led upwards, not to mention whether or not the silver root system was still there. Even if he managed to get rid of it, Cheney didn't have full confidence he could find the correct way out of this labyrinth-like crack tunnel. There was a high chance that this path would not work. Since he couldn't turn back, he could only brace himself and continue deeper into the crack in the earth. Moreover, there was a vague idea hidden in his heart. The old turtle and the stone pagoda had both said that there was a great secret hidden within this mountain. According to what Cheney saw, it was highly likely that it was underground. If he continued downwards, he might be able to obtain some harvests. It wasn't that he had become greedy after escaping danger. Rather, the truth was that the problem of Cheney's body of laws collapsing had only been temporarily suppressed. It hadn't been completely resolved yet. Perhaps the secret of this mountain might be able to help his body of laws complete the process of being broken before being reconstructed. Of course, this was only a possibility. He could take it as a bit of hope in a helpless situation. At the very least, it would make his heart feel a little better. Then he would go down. The Lost Garden was a small world that was forcefully split apart by an ancient life form. But this so-called small was only relative to the massive, vast young world. In fact, the space within was extremely large. So large that even though the Lost Garden had opened many times over the countless years, the cultivators that came from outside had only been able to explore the outer regions. Before his death, Zhang Zhongshi had played a trick on Qinyu. He had used a divine sense message to attract all the cultivators here. His plan had been extremely successful. Nearly all the cultivators that heard the message stepped onto the road towards the Lost Garden. But problems soon appeared. This was because the deeper one went, the more dangerous the Lost Garden became. Soon, it reached an unbearable degree. The powerhouses were fine. After paying a price, they could continue forwards. But the weaker ones were lightly wounded and fled. The more unlucky ones would end up as food for some ferocious ancient era's life forms. Like a great wave washing away sand, the road to the depths of the Lost Garden buried a group of people and scared away an even greater group. In the end, less than 20% of the total number of people were able to pass. But without exception, as long as a cultivator could arrive in front of this mountain that supported the heavens, they either had formidable cards in their hands or possessed absolute strength. The eldest senior apprentice brother looked up at the towering mountain that pierced into the highest heavens. He frowned, his eyes filled with awe. These emotions weren't contradictory. He frowned because this mountain gave him a very bad feeling, and his eldest senior apprentice brother's senses had always been very accurate. As for the admiration in his eyes, it was even simpler. This was because the mountain in front of him was far too big. It was so big that even the eldest senior apprentice brother, who had followed the yardmaster to countless places, would find it difficult to find a mountain that could compare to it. Perhaps the residents of that clan and the grandeur of that mountain could barely compare to this place. But in terms of aura, it was still slightly weaker. Lei Xiaoyu stood behind the eldest senior apprentice brother obediently. Her eyes swept around from time to time, revealing a look of excitement and nervousness. Her current performance was completely different from when she was alone with the eldest senior apprentice brother. If Qinyu saw all of this, he would definitely shout out loud. I knew there was something wrong with Lei Xiaoyu. The yard master must be plotting against someone. For instance, the West Mountain Nine Heads, or the Netherworld Nightwalker, who is currently staring at the two people in the peach garden with cold and bitter eyes. The Heavenly Palace's crown prince occupied a place to himself. He was surrounded by some cultivators who were close to the Heavenly Palace Holy Land. At this moment, he frowned but didn't step forward to greet them. Eldest senior apprentice brother, what did you do to Nightwalker? How could he look at you like that? Even His Highness the Crown Prince is so scared that he doesn't dare to come over. I'm really scared, Lei Xiaoyu whispered. The eldest senior apprentice brother frowned, his eyes filled with helplessness. He also whispered back, Junior sister, when you're scared, can you wipe away the saliva that's about to flow out? Lei Xiaoyu didn't believe him. Is it that obvious? The eldest senior apprentice brother smiled bitterly. Don't mess around. Night Walker is highly valued by the Netherworld Saint. If you touch him, there will be a lot of trouble. Is Master afraid? Of course not. The eldest senior apprentice brother took a deep breath. In short, don't even think about touching him. At most, you can beat him up, but you absolutely can't kill him. Lei Xiaoyu lowered her head, hiding the boredom on her face. She couldn't even touch someone who came to her on his own accord. It was really boring. While the two of them were talking in private, the others didn't stop either. They were busy reaching agreements with each other or looking for ways to enter the mountain. That's right. The reason why everyone was so free and took such a great risk to rush here was because they stopped outside the mountain to chat. The reason was simple. The mountain was right in front of them, but they couldn't enter. This was difficult to bear, but they couldn't bear to leave. Moreover, everyone was waiting, so they couldn't leave. But as for what exactly they were waiting for, no one knew. But there were also some people who were relatively calm. In their opinion, since there was a mysterious powerhouse that had lured them here with their divine sense, there would surely be follow-up arrangements. No matter what this person's goal was, it was necessary for them to enter the mountain in front of them. So all they had to do was wait. Only the Western Mountain Nine Heads slightly lowered his head. Between his furrowed eyebrows, there was a hint of helplessness and worry. He was the only one who knew a part of the truth. The consciousness that his master had split off to enter the Lost Garden had now been shattered, so it was impossible for there to be any other arrangements. So if they waited like this, it was likely that they would just be waiting blindly and there would be no harvest at all. But what else could they do? The mountain was right in front of them. If it didn't allow anyone to enter, then forcing their way in was the simplest and most effective method. But the problem was that the Western Mountain Nine Heads didn't dare to do so. That's right, the Western Mountain Nine Heads, who was known to have 9 lives and could live as long as one of them didn't die, was now filled with awe and fear. He didn't know what was hidden in the mountain in front of him. He couldn't even detect the slightest trace of an abnormal aura. But he was afraid and in awe. No matter what, he couldn't take that step forward. And this fear wasn't just limited to the Western Mountain Nine Heads. Almost everyone in front of the mountain, including the eldest senior brother, was shrouded in it. So they couldn't imagine that this mountain that they were so terrified of just by looking at it was actually someone who had come in with them. Now, this person was following the crack in the ground, going all the way down and almost reaching the bottom of the mountain. It was just that this person who was much faster than them had now encountered trouble and had no choice but to stop for the time being. Because fog was rising from the crack in the ground. This wasn't a wetland in the early morning or a field in the suburbs where you were buried underground for a long time and didn't know anything. No matter how deep the crack in the ground was, there was still fog. Even if one thought with their knees, they would know that it was not as simple as it seemed. But whether it was simple or not, the fog was there, blocking your path. If you wanted to go deeper, you had to drill in. Qinyu had already tried other options. He left and drilled in. But the result was that the dozens of cracks in the ground were all filled with fog. So, there was probably no other way. Standing outside the fog, Qinyu hesitated for a long time. He even thought about whether or not he should try to return all the way to the surface. But in the end, he gave up, because at the very least, this fog didn't seem too dangerous. Then, he might as well give it a try. After all, he was already very close to the bottom of the mountain. Clenching his teeth, Qinyu stepped out and flew into the fog. Songzhu curled up her body, allowing the fog to submerge her. At this time, her eyes were wide open, filled with unwillingness and pain. If she had known earlier that this would be the result, perhaps she wouldn't have taken this step. At the very least, she wouldn't have caused Tanhai to be buried here with her. If she died, the old ancestor would surely sense it and take out his anger on her. And there was also Tanhai's family. Who knew how many people would be implicated? Song Zhu was well aware of her old ancestor's character. When it came to killing, he would never show the least bit of mercy. So, these people that were about to be killed had all been implicated by her. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I didn't want things to be like this. I hope that you can forgive me. Amidst the torment of despair, her eyes were filled with pain. But now, there was a strange flush on her face. Her breathing was rapid, as if she were silently enduring something. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed out. Song Zhu's eyes widened, panic on her face. She struggled, wanting to stand up from the ground. But her entire body was sore and weak. Every time she tried, she failed. Instead, these movements and the sounds they made were clearly discovered by the other party. The faint sound rapidly approached. It was the sound of footsteps. Song Zhu closed her eyes in pain. Then, she violently opened them. She had already decided that she would take the initiative to end her life. She had already made enough mistakes. No matter what, she could not allow this to happen. The fog was rapidly moved, and the air currents were blown away. The blurry figure in the fog suddenly became clear. Song Zhu's face was filled with sorrow and determination. She suddenly froze where she was, her eyes wide open as she stared at the figure in front of her. If it wasn't Tan Hai, then who was hidden beneath the blood-red robes? There was actually someone else here. There was a light cough from beneath the blood-red robes. A hand pulled down the hood, and a face that had appeared in the depths of her mind countless times appeared in front of Song Zhu. It was him. It was actually him. How is this possible? Didn't he die in the Black Storm? Was it just an illusion? Could it be that she had never been able to forget him in her heart? Even on the verge of death, she was still hallucinating. As Song Zhu bitterly smiled and laughed at herself, Qin Yu couldn't help but frown. Could it be that this jinx had been invaded by the infernal energy and turned into an idiot? He originally thought that he would be able to obtain some useful information from her. After all, Song Zhu had a mysterious origin to begin with. Now that she had suddenly appeared deep beneath this mountain, he didn't believe a single word she said was the same as Qin Yu's and that she had been forced here step by step. There was definitely a problem here. What does this woman want to do? She reached out a hand, and it looks like she wants to touch my face. Hey, although you are beautiful, your face is flushed red and your clothes are a bit messy. You are indeed very tempting, but I am not a casual person. Please show me some respect. Qin Yu took a step back, avoiding the hand that was reaching out. He said in a low voice, Miss Song Zhu, are you awake or not? It could speak. It wasn't an illusion. Song Zhu's hand froze, and her eyes widened. Then, her face flushed red. As she thought back to her previous actions, she wanted to find a crack in the ground to crawl into, but she had forgotten that right now, she and Qin Yu were both in a crack in the ground. Luckily, she didn't come from a small family, so she still had a calm and rational mind. Moreover, Qin Yu's words gave her a way out. Song Zhu took a deep breath and steadied her mind. She withdrew her hand and let out a light breath. I'm sorry. My mind was affected by the infernal energy just now. I asked Brother Qin to forgive me for my lack of manners. She paused for a moment and continued to say, Moreover, I owe Brother Qin an apology. When I was in the Black Storm, it was you who helped me. After that, I went back to look for you, but in the end, I couldn't find you. I thought, luckily, Brother Qin is a lucky man, so I can feel a bit more at ease. Qin Yu's expression didn't change. He didn't comment on this woman's words. He took another step back and looked at her, saying, There is no need to speak of matters of the past. If you really want to thank me, then I would like to know why Miss Song Zhu would appear here. Chapter 1278. The facts prove that Song Zhu was a very smart woman. She met Qin Yu's gaze and hesitated for less than a second before giving him the answer he wanted. The reason I appeared here is to find something. If Brother Qin needs it, I can tell you. Ignoring her hesitation, Qin Yu said, If that's the case, then I must thank Miss Song Zhu. Please speak. This clearly didn't follow common sense. Song Zhu's breath caught in her throat. Facing his calm eyes, she couldn't help but let go of her last shred of restraint. She took a deep breath and said, I owed Brother Chin a life-saving graciousness, so I shouldn't have made any other requests. But in order to save me, Tanhai has lost his mind due to the invasion of infernal energy. I must save him. Chin frowned. Infernal energy erodes one's mind. He looked at Song Zhu and shook his head. His voice was slow but firm. I'm sorry, but I cannot save him. Song Zhu panicked. Brother Chin is strong. You can definitely save him. Tanhai, before she finished speaking, she was interrupted by Chin Yu. He said in a low voice, Miss Song Zhu, you and I are both within the range of infernal energy, so we are well aware of how terrifying it is. After one's mind is eroded, they will attack anyone they encounter. There is almost no chance of saving them. Seeing that Song Zhu hadn't given up, Chin Yu thought for a moment and continued to say, I can roughly feel Brother Tanhai's strength. If even he can't resist the invasion of infernal energy, then it must be a place where infernal energy gathers. If I go in, I have no confidence I can escape unscathed. This was the truth. After entering the fog, one would gradually discover that this fog was a product of infernal energy exceeding a certain limit. It could affect one's mind, interfere with one's judgment, and even erode one's mind, turning them into puppets controlled by infernal energy. Chin Yu had encountered some life forms that had their minds eroded by infernal energy before. He had also experienced the terror of a place where infernal energy gathered, so he certainly didn't want to wade into these muddy waters. Of course, the other reason he decisively refused wasn't so glorious. Because looking at the current situation, Song Zhu didn't have any other choice as long as she wanted to continue living. Song Zhu was silent. As if realizing this, she lowered her head, concealing her expression. Just as Chin Yu thought she had given up, Song Zhu suddenly looked up and earnestly stared into his eyes. She slowly said, I am the bloodline descendant of a clam girl and a human. I have inherited my mother's abilities, and I am also one of the purest clam girls in the East Sea. Chin Yu secretly frowned. Why are you telling me this? Don't tell me you still want to use your status and bloodline to suppress me? No matter how he looked at it, this woman shouldn't be this stupid. East Sea clam girl. It was Sure Ta who spoke. The old turtle's mouth twitched, but he didn't have much of a reaction. He was already numb to it. If he wanted to show off, so be it. He didn't know how long he would live, so what was the point of caring about such things? Chin Yu said, How do you know? Sure Ta coughed lightly and said indifferently, After living for a long time, you will know more things than others. If this woman really has the bloodline of an Eastern Sea clam girl, perhaps Master should help her. It didn't finish its sentence. It wasn't that the stone tower didn't want to explain, but it knew very well that the hidden pearl was about to say it. If it spoke ahead of time, the shock and temptation wouldn't be enough. In truth, it was more inclined to have Chin Yu agree. With Chin Yu's firm will, a bit of infernal energy wasn't too much of a problem. The main problem was that he didn't want to take risks, and it would be troublesome later on. Hidden Pearl spoke up. Her face flushed red, but she remained brave. She stared at Chin Yu's eyes and slowly said, I am still a virgin. The clam girl is my first man. If I can obtain the strength of the clam girl's pearl, it will be greatly beneficial to my cultivation. But the clam girl must be completely willing. Otherwise, the clam girl will break apart on her own and vanish from sight. In truth, although Chin Yu was still expressionless, his heart was indeed stunned. He never imagined that what would follow would be such an absurd and cliched plot. He looked at the hidden pearl in front of him. She was clearly of noble birth, and she was suppressing her embarrassment and shyness as she bravely looked at him. She had probably been seduced by someone, and the quality was so high. Even if Chin Yu didn't have any thoughts in his heart that he shouldn't have, he still couldn't help but feel his heart sway. This was not shameful, because if it was you, you would also have to be slutty, and you might even be so slutty that you couldn't suppress it anymore. Being seduced, especially by a woman like Song Zhu, no matter how one looked at it, it would take a lot of effort to resist. Chin Yu coughed. He was about to say something to show that he absolutely wouldn't succumb to temptation because of something like this. As for the clam pearls, he had already swallowed the 12 sources of life, including 2 purple high-quality ones. Therefore, he didn't need them at all. Master, you need. Shurta spoke softly, his tone as calm as possible. The clam pearls in the clam girls' bodies are nurtured in their bodies when they are born. Most of the energy they contain is pure and powerful life force. Master's body of laws needs this kind of pure and powerful life force to complete the process of destruction and reconstruction. Regarding this matter, the stone tower definitely did not dare to speak carelessly. In other words, it was actually true. I need the clam pearls. If I need the clam pearls, then I have to agree. The process was clear and smooth. The overall difficulty of this matter did not seem to be too high. What am I thinking? Why would he think that way? Hurry up and stop. But Qin, you didn't realize that the silence after he coughed had already revealed enough meaning in Songju's eyes. For instance, he was already moved, but he felt it was too dangerous, so he was still hesitating. Songju bit her lips and said, I also know a secret about this mountain. If this secret is true, it represents endless lucky chances and good fortune. Brother Qin, if you agree, I will tell you this secret as well. Qin Yu's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know why, but when he heard Songju mention this secret, he inexplicably thought back to the silver root system he encountered before. It seemed that this secret was related to it, and it also had a tremendous influence on Qin Yu. What secret? Songju shook her head. I cannot say it now, but as long as Brother Qin can save Tanhai, I will definitely keep my promise. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. He lightly said, I can't risk my life just because of Mist Songju's words without any evidence. At the very least, you need to give me some evidence to confirm that you aren't lying to me. You bastard, you've already agreed to my deal, and yet you still say something like just because of my words? Just what am I in your eyes? Songju was angry and ashamed, but she didn't dare to reveal it. She could only glare at Qin Yu. This bastard, his appearance isn't bad. What am I thinking? I should be angry right now. Yes, I should be angry. But what he said seemed to make sense. If he wanted to save someone, then she couldn't follow him first. She had to give him a bit of confidence. Look for justice. After silently finding a reason for Qin Yu, Songju took a deep breath and took out a fragment. I can give this to Brother Qin first. This thing has an extremely close relationship with this mountain. You will understand after touching it. Qin Yu silently took in his hand and immediately felt a burning pain. He looked at Songju in front of him. This woman had tilted her head slightly. She really did this on purpose. She wanted to see his expression when his hand was scalded. But unfortunately, Qin Yu had already guessed this at first glance, so he was mentally prepared. That's right. The fragment that Songju gave Qin Yu was exactly the same as the one she had obtained from the plucking cultivator Su Wei. In fact, it was even a bit larger. Qin Yu wasn't sure what relationship this thing had with this mountain, but he had seen its might with his own eyes. A dignified, true saint puppet had been casually smashed apart with a single strike. This was simply a heaven-shattering power. As this thought appeared in Qin Yu's mind, a voice sounded out in his mind. Do you need protection? This voice was far too familiar. He decisively rejected it. In this small situation, Qin Yu was more than capable of dealing with it. Of course, he couldn't use this precious fragment, although he didn't know what it was or where this voice came from. Without a doubt, this fragment was Qin Yu's strongest trump card. It was a powerful guarantee that he could survive in this mountain. Killing the true saint puppet in a single strike was no different than swatting a mosquito. It was simply too easy. No one knew just what sort of terrifying strength this fragment represented. Qin Yu suppressed the excitement in his heart. The only thing he didn't understand was that if Songju had this fragment, how did she end up in such a situation? Could it be that she couldn't hear this voice? No matter, he had to put this thing away first. Qin Yu flipped his hand and looked at Songju. Okay, I'll help you save him. Since he had received the item, he naturally had to abide by the agreement. Disregarding everything else, just this fragment was worth the risk. Moreover, What the stone pagoda said wasn't wrong. Although things like infernal energy were difficult to avoid and couldn't be avoided, an imperfect body of rules was still a body of rules. In addition, his will was firm enough, so it wasn't a problem to be a bit more cautious. Song Zhu cursed inwardly at how shameless he was. Just now he was speaking as if he were about to die, but now that there was a benefit, he immediately agreed. But soon her face stiffened. Since Qin Yu had already agreed, then according to the previous agreement, she needed to follow him. What if he wanted it now? How could she refuse? If she was rejected, what if he became angry and went back on his word? Should she agree just like that? Luckily, Qin Yu didn't make Song Zhu feel awkward. Song Zhu was in a difficult position. She looked at Song Zhu's gloomy expression and thought that she was distressed over the loss of the treasure. So she simply pretended not to see anything. She said, "You stay here and don't move. Just point me in a direction. I'll go find him." Song Zhu subconsciously lifted her hand. Then, with a whoosh, Qin Yu had already moved. Her first thought was that this fellow was going to turn hostile and run away as soon as he got the item. But there was clearly something he hadn't eaten yet. So how could he just leave like that? She wanted to call for help, but Qin Yu's figure was already nowhere to be seen. Song Zhu covered her face. She thought, "You're usually considered smart. Even if your cultivation was sealed, was your brain also sealed? Why are you always so stupid when facing this fellow? But then again, this surname Qin fellow is really good looking, and I'm still thinking about this. I am definitely hopeless. Before this, I clearly didn't think he was anything special, but this fellow left like this without leaving anything behind. He didn't seem worried about me at all. Did he really run away?" Just as Song Zhu could not help but let his imagination run wild, the sound of something flying through the air rapidly approached. Then, with a bang, a person was thrown in front of him. It was Tan Hai, who was imprisoned and struggling with all his might. As he fell beside Song Zhu, as if he could smell her scent, Tan Hai struggled even more fiercely. His eyes stared straight at her, and he constantly roared. Qin Yu waved his hand. There was a tooth mark that hadn't faded yet. This fellow must have been born in the year of the dog. He actually bit me. If I knew earlier, I would have just ignored him and left him to fend for himself. This person must have said this on purpose. After all, Tan Hai's current actions and his body's reaction were truly embarrassing. Song Zhu relaxed a little. She looked away and said, "Thank you, Brother Qin." After thanking him, she suddenly remembered that he hadn't wasted much time at all. Moreover, the process of searching for Tan Hai was also included. In other words, rescuing Tan Hai wasn't anything at all for Qin Yu. He could do it casually. How hateful! It had clearly been as easy as lifting a finger, but he had forced her into a corner and forced her to hand over everything. This person was simply rotten to the core. Qin Yu glanced at Song Zhu. "What are you staring at me for? I've already rescued him, and our transaction is over. If there's nothing else, then I'll be leaving." Although nothing had happened to Song Zhu this time, it was best to stay as far away from something like a jinx as possible. The scene of a hero saving a beauty was something that every man had imagined before. But right now, Qin Yu didn't have any such thoughts at all. Although it seemed that he was temporarily safe, he had already personally experienced the horrors of this mountain. How could he dare to be careless? It wasn't easy to ensure his own safety. Bringing along a jinx along with a nearly insane burden like Tan Hai was no different from seeking death. Qin Yu decisively turned and left. Song Zhu was stunned. Seeing that he was about to disappear, she loudly said, "No, our transaction isn't over yet." The fog tumbled about, but Qin Yu's figure was nowhere to be seen. Song Zhu bit her lips. She looked at Tan Hai, who was struggling on the ground, her eyes filled with hesitation. After thinking for a long time, Song Zhu suddenly shed tears. She looked at the red-eyed Tan Hai and said, "I'm sorry, big brother. I have no way to save you. Rather than letting you live like this, I might as well help you free yourself. Don't worry, what Song Zhu owes you, I will repay you double in my next life. Big brother, this is all my fault. I've dragged you down with me." Her eyes fell down, and she reached out to grab Tan Hai's neck. There was the sound of footsteps. Qin Yu frowned, an impatient look on his face. What are you looking at? If you didn't even have this bit of determination, then I wouldn't have come out. I would have left you to fend for yourself. After agreeing to Song Zhu's request and returning from rescuing Tan Hai, Qin Yu thought of the troubles that would follow. He made a bet with himself. If Song Zhu could bear to do it, then he would help her once more. After all, he was well aware of just how precious the fragment he took from someone else was. It was fine to feel a bit guilty, but if it was too much, he would feel uncomfortable. He walked over and slammed his palm down, knocking Tan Hai unconscious. Qin Yu picked him up and threw him into a crack in the ground. He turned and looked at Song Zhu. My abilities are limited, so I can only bring one person away. If you don't want to, then stay here and accompany him. Song Zhu bit her lips. She looked at the unconscious Tan Hai and then turned towards Qin Yu. I will come back and bring him away. It has nothing to do with me. You were the one who knocked him unconscious. If you don't want to leave, then go back. Song Zhu immediately shut his mouth and looked back at the place that was covered by the fog. He muttered in his heart, "Brother, don't worry. I promise that he will come back to save you. Because the deal between the two of us is still lacking the most crucial step." Chapter 1279. Qin Yu had already discovered that the fog formed from the infernal energy in this crack was a clever one. It knew how to judge a person. If you couldn't resist the invasion of the infernal energy, then there was nothing else to say. It would violently push you all the way to the ground, corroding your consciousness and turning you into a puppet to be controlled. But if you could resist it, the murderous aura would change its pattern. It would show its gentle side in front of you. It would not give you too much pressure. At most, it would add a little spice to your life. For example, it would arouse the little desire in your heart. It would make you unconsciously impulsive and more easily seduced. So, Qin Yu soon discovered that bringing Song Zhu along with him wasn't a wise choice. This was because this woman's rapid breathing and the smell that came from her body had become particularly challenging to one's senses. It took a great deal of effort to suppress it, causing ripples in his heart. And what left Qin Yu the most helpless was that as he went deeper, the crack didn't show any signs of bottoming out. Instead, the fog in the air became even thicker. For the time being, he was able to maintain his consciousness. But Song Zhu's condition wasn't quite right. Her breathing became faster and faster. Her hand that held onto Qin Yu's hand was wet and wet. She unconsciously clenched and loosened and tightened again. Fragrant sweat dripped down her face like a peach blossom. This was probably Song Zhu's current state. It was as if all the bones in her body had been pulled out. She weakly leaned against Qin Yu's body. This scene was far too much of a test of one's endurance. Qin Yu felt his nose itch. He wondered if he was going to have a nosebleed. Otherwise, he would lose all face. As he was trying his best to divert his attention, Song Zhu suddenly looked up at him. "Brother Qin, my consciousness isn't clear right now. It is likely that I will destroy the clam pearl. So, please don't touch me, I beg you." For such a proud woman to say such words on her own initiative, the shame and embarrassment in her heart must have already reached the breaking point. Song Zhu bit her lips, trying not to reveal her emotions. But she didn't know that her stubborn appearance, right now, was even more tempting to a man. Qin Yu cursed inwardly. He kept a straight face and said, "Don't worry, I have no interest in beautiful women with long legs and breasts." How could he praise someone like this? Despite the current situation, Song Zhu couldn't help but feel a little happy. Then, he couldn't help but have a thought. Since the agreement hadn't been completely fulfilled, why not take this opportunity? "No, Song Zhu, calm down. Men are all cheap bastards. The easier it is to get something, the more they won't cherish it. Persevere, persevere. The longer you hold on, the better he'll treat you in the future. Only then can your relationship get back on track. Otherwise, the future of a man and a woman who came together because of a deal could be imagined." He hummed and lowered his head. In truth, Song Zhu was very satisfied with Qin Yu's current performance. Although this person was a little cunning and bad, He was not a person who would take advantage of others when they were down. Moreover, he had very strong self-control and restraint. Such a man was most likely not a mediocre person. For hours later, the influence of the infernal energy on Hidden Pearl became increasingly strong. She was tightly pressed against Qin Yu's body. She was like a snake, constantly rubbing and squirming. Her eyes were half closed, and she breathed out fragrant air from her nose and mouth. This was simply unbearable. Qin Yu could sense the shame and embarrassment in the depths of this woman's eyes. But as she struggled to maintain a clear consciousness, it was clear that she could no longer suppress the instinctive impulses in her body. Song Zhu was well aware that if Qin Yu wanted to do something at this time, whether it was physically or mentally, there was no way for her to refuse. There was even a bit of anticipation that she didn't want to admit, but it was still there. This was just too shameful. Had he already sensed it and was about to make a move? Should she pretend to have no reaction, or should she take the initiative to cooperate? Would this be difficult to bear? She had asked the big sisters in the clan several times, but all of them had strange expressions. Qin Yu closed his eyes and then opened them again. He suddenly reached out and placed his hand on Sangju's pink neck. The moment he touched her, she let out a soft moan. But that was all. His 5 fingers tightened around her neck, and then his arm pushed outwards, as if he were grabbing onto a naughty little rabbit and lifting her into the air. If you're not conscious, then sleep for a while. It's good for your body. Hearing these words, Hidden Pearl's forehead was slapped. Her vision darkened, and she instantly fainted. She was finally quiet. Qin Yu let out a long breath. He couldn't help but grit his teeth. Bringing this woman along with him was definitely a mistake. It wasn't that there was no way to fix it. If he left her here to fend for herself, he would be free. But to go back on his word like this was far too tasteless. Moreover, Qin Yu still hadn't asked Song Zhu about the secret. It wasn't that he had forgotten, but that Song Zhu was very smart. She knew that only by holding back could she ensure her own safety to the greatest degree. Qin Yu could understand this. He originally wanted to wait and find a chance to ask her, but who knew that this woman would be so useless? She couldn't resist the temptation of the infernal energy and almost even led him astray. He took a deep breath. Because Qin Yu suddenly felt that he should use his own personal experience as an example to argue for men. In truth, when they made a mistake, they really shouldn't bear all the responsibility. It was just that the little fae outside were far too bewitching. If he wasn't careful, he would fall into a trance. Luckily, Qin Yu was able to keep his composure. Woo! Qin Yu swept his eyes around. Song Zhu's disheveled appearance and the soft and smooth feeling he felt when he rubbed against her just now, causing his heartbeat to speed up. No, he had to hurry and stop. Why did you ask me what I was looking up for? I suddenly want to study the lines of the cracks in the ground above my head. Why do I have to block my nose with my hand? Ha! In such a deep crack, there isn't any air to circulate all year round. If I feel uncomfortable, can't I just block my nose? What a busybody. After adjusting his condition with great difficulty, Qin Yu thought for a moment and rummaged through his stored treasure. He found some clothes and stuffed Song Zhu inside. He wrapped several layers of clothing around his head, leaving only a small hole to breathe through. This was much better. I won't feel guilty. After all, I'm just keeping my promise to you. But, you woman, you are far too fickle. Not too long ago, you even begged me not to touch you. What you did just now could be considered throwing yourself into my arms. Humph humph, women really can't be trusted. Reaching out his hand, he seemed to be satisfied with the feeling. Qin Yu nodded. Then, as if he were carrying a large bird cage, he walked deeper into the fog. It was already so deep into the night, and they should have reached their destination. Did she really want him to stay here for the New Year's? Perhaps sensing Qin Yu's ridicule, half a day later, he passed through the crack in the ground, and an incomparably massive cave suddenly appeared in front of him. It was very sudden. A moment ago, the fog was as thick as the night, and it was hard to see your fingers in front of you. But as soon as he took a step forward, it was like he had crossed over some barrier. Like this, a brand new world appeared in front of him without warning. The mountain was very large, so the cave within the mountain was also very large. There was nothing wrong with this simple and direct logic. And in fact, it was very, very large. It was so large that it was like an endless mountain plain. Without the pungent fog, the air became incomparably fresh. There was light shining in front of them. There were lush green trees, endless grasslands, and all sorts of living beings. In fact, Chinyu even saw some farmers in the fields. At this time, they were all staring at them with wide eyes. There were no accidents, nor were there any conflicts. All of the living beings here were friendly and harmonious to the point that they were extremely enthusiastic. Even for someone like Chinyu, who was carrying a beautiful unconscious girl in his hands, besides the initial surprise, they were all smiles. Under the warm invitation of the village chief, Chinyu came to his home as a guest. The mistress of the house was a charming middle-aged woman, and there were also 3 beautiful daughters in the house. Although they all wore coarse clothes, it was hard to hide their beauty. Their eyes were large and their eyelashes fluttered about. They were beautiful to look at. When the dishes were served, she kept sneaking glances at Chinyu. Then, as she looked, her face blushed red. She didn't even dare to say a single word as she turned her head and ran away. That youthful and lively aura, as well as that youthful and full curves that didn't seem to match, was extremely alluring. The village chief was all smiles. A country girl has been disrespectful. I hope that honored guest doesn't mind. She hesitated for a moment and then pointed at the cloth bag at Chinyu's feet. If possible, have the honored guest inside come out as well. My wife and little miss can accompany the female guest to freshen up a bit before coming to eat. Chinyu observed the other party's expression. He couldn't find anything wrong with the other party's face. It was filled with sincerity and sincerity. But he definitely couldn't agree. Even if he didn't use his knees to think, he could guess that there was definitely a problem with this place. Cough. My little sister's body isn't too good, and she can't stand too much light, so it's fine to have her stay inside. Oh, if that's the case, then this old man has spoken too much. I hope honored guest doesn't take offense. Please, please, please. This is just some simple food from the countryside. I hope honored guest doesn't mind. The village chief's smile was brilliant. Chinyu whispered to himself. In his current state, he probably wouldn't die from poison. He immediately raised his chopsticks and raised his cup. After eating and drinking for some time, with the physique of a cultivator, the village chief certainly didn't fear alcohol. Soon, his face flushed red and his eyes blurred. Chinyu faintly smiled as he saw this. He pulled him over to drink another cup and said, "Village chief, why is our village here? Is there no connection to the outside world?" The village chief hiccuped. He first had an apologetic look on his face, and then said, "Our village has been here for many years. No one has left for many years. This is the rule of the village. In the past, there were some disobedient juniors who relied on their strength and fierceness to run away. In the end, they never came back." Chinyu's eyes flashed. "I won't hide it from the village chief. Me and my little sister ran out from home. We wanted to learn from a great master, but I don't know how we ended up here. I would like to ask the village chief to tell me if there are any legendary great masters here." The village chief waved his hand again and again. Where did any great masters come from? They are just some tricks to train one's strength. Honored guest, please do not believe them. You two were lucky this time and ran in from the outside, but you don't dare to go out again. As long as we are a bit more diligent, we should be able to make a living with our harvest. As he spoke, his words were relatively clear. But just as he finished speaking, there was a loud thud as he slumped onto the table and began to snore loudly. The mistress clearly understood her man's alcohol tolerance. Perhaps she had been waiting outside the entire time and had walked in when she heard the commotion. She said with an apologetic expression, "Honored guest, I've let you see a joke. He is old, but refuses to accept his old age. Where is his alcohol tolerance from the past? I will bring him to a place to settle down first. Honored guest, please wait here for a moment. When I return, I will arrange a place for you and the mistress to stay." She bent down to help the drunken village chief up. She pulled up her clothes, revealing a mature woman's plump and white waist. Although it was a fleeting moment, it was a lingering aftertaste. She stood up and apologetically smiled at Chinyu. Then, she supported the village chief and left. Soon, before Chinyu could process any more thoughts, the mistress returned. Perhaps it was because she had used up some of her strength, but her face was flushed red and her breathing was a bit uneven. "Honored guest, have you eaten?" Seeing Chinyu nod, her smile widened. "Everything to wash up has been prepared. Honored guest, please follow me. We will meet at your residence." The village chief's residence occupied a considerable amount of land. Although the construction wasn't too gorgeous, it inexplicably made one feel comfortable, as if everything should be like this. He pushed open the door to the east room. There was a living room and a living room. Right now, steam was rising from behind the bamboo curtains, as if a bath had already been prepared. The mistress smiled. "The mistress is still asleep. Honored guest, you might as well wash up first and then place her on the bed to continue resting." Chinyu thought for a moment and said, "That's fine too." He untied the cloth bag wrapped in clothes and placed the hidden beads on the bed. He also wanted to see just what the hell was going on right now. If he used her as bait, he might be able to draw out something. This could be considered a last resort. The mistress took a deep breath, her face blushing red. "Honored guest, please follow me to wash up." Chinyu glanced at her and nodded. Now, he would act according to her wishes. He wanted to see just what sort of tricks she could play. Chinyu took off his clothes. When only his white clothes remained, he stepped into the bathtub. "Let's do this." The hostess nodded. With a blushing face, she brought him a cup of water. After washing up a bit, Chinyu thought that this was just SOSO. Suddenly, there was the sound of clothes being undone behind him. She turned her head to look and immediately turned back. How could it be so fierce? The development of this plot was really fast. "Wait a moment. What is the meaning of this, madam?" The mistress was stunned. She mumbled, "I'm going in to help the honored guest wash up." Her tone was matter-of-fact, and there was a bit of confusion in her eyes, as if she didn't understand why she was saying this now. This almost made Chinyu think that he was abnormal. There was no way to continue. As Chinyu was considering whether or not to turn hostile, the mistress put on her clothes again. There was a trace of bitterness in her eyes. She looked at Chinyu and said in a soft voice, "I am a broken and withered willow. I'm not fit to serve the honored guest. Let my 3 daughters do it. Although they are rough, they're still pretty." Chinyu thought that those 3 young girls were only considered pretty. Her definition of beauty wasn't low at all. Suddenly, he heard a sound outside. He waved his hand. "No need. Our family doesn't have this kind of custom. Madam, you can go by yourself." The mistress nodded and turned to leave. Chinyu stood up from the bathtub. With a thought, his clothes dried. With a thought, his robes automatically appeared, and he walked out. "If you're awake, then get up. You can't even pretend to be asleep." Songju opened her eyes. She stared at him and quietly said, "I was afraid that my words would ruin Brother Chin's plans." Her tone was full of twists and turns. Chinyu rubbed his temples. "Don't think too much about it. Let me briefly explain the current situation to you." After Song Zhu heard this, she revealed a dignified expression. "There is definitely a problem here." Chinyu was left speechless. He thought that even if she said it, his knees would understand. He looked at Song Zhu and decisively gave up. What kind of constructive suggestions could she give him? There was no problem. At the very least, from the moment he entered until now, Chinyu hadn't sensed anything wrong. Besides being startled by the mistress taking off her clothes, it could even be said that this was a nearly perfect example of hospitality. But there was no problem. This was the greatest problem. Chinyu felt that this village was strange everywhere. Perhaps he should go out and take a look. That's right, as long as it was a trap, there would definitely be a flaw. If he looked for it, he would surely have a harvest. Chinyu stood up and said, "I want to go out for a walk. Do you want to come?" Song Zhu quickly nodded. In the courtyard, Chinyu bid farewell to the mistress. Then, under the bitter gazes of his 3 daughters, he brought Song Zhu out. Just as he stepped out the door, he heard her voice behind him. "How beautiful! Is Brother Chin really not tempted at all?" Yu was disinclined to reply. If he couldn't figure out the situation, why would he be tempted at all? Moreover, this little girl seemed to be underestimating him too much. He could even hold his ground against her, so why would he be afraid of these 3 girls? He couldn't say this. Women were magical creatures. It was best to occasionally praise them, but if he said it too often, it wouldn't have any effect. Chapter 1280. The village wasn't too large. It didn't take much time for Qin Yu and Song Zhu to walk around. The people they met were all incomparably warm and enthusiastic. They answered their questions without any hesitation, and their answers were mostly the same. To summarize, it was roughly as follows. Many years ago, an earth-shattering event occurred. In order to take refuge, the ancestors of the village moved their entire family here. Moreover, they strictly ordered their descendants not to take a single step out of the village in order to ensure the continuation of the village. Besides that, it was basically the appearance of an ordinary village. There wasn't anything strange about it. He asked the old turtle and a stone pagoda, and they also received the same answers. This was terrifying. They clearly knew there was a problem, but everything seemed normal, as if besides shedding all pretense of cordiality, there was no other choice. In truth, this wasn't the first time Qin Yu had this thought. But as long as he thought of this, he would feel restless, as if something horrifying would happen if he really did this. He asked Song Zhu, and she actually had a similar premonition. This left Qin Yu secretly cold, and he didn't dare to act rashly. In fact, he couldn't help but imagine that this village was set up by the ancient ancestors to protect their descendants after they sensed the abnormalities of ancient life forms. But if this was true, then why were the people in this village all ordinary people? Why didn't they have the strength of a cultivator? With an excuse that he wasn't feeling well, he politely declined the hostess's warm invitation to dinner. Then, Qin Yu and Song Zhu locked themselves in their room. Finally, they made a decision. Tomorrow, they would use returning home as an excuse to leave this strange village in this cave. Perhaps it was because they had already made their decision, but after relaxing a little, they actually felt particularly tired. Song Zhu fell asleep first. Qin Yu persisted for a bit longer, but still couldn't resist the exhaustion that washed over him like a tide. He closed his eyes and fell asleep on the table. After a dark and dreamless sleep, it was like all the pressure on his body had been washed away. The moment he woke up, he felt an unprecedented sense of relaxation. Qin Yu opened his eyes. He turned around and looked at the still, sleeping Song Zhu. It had been a peaceful night, and nothing had happened at all. But why hadn't she been vigilant at all and had directly fallen asleep? This clearly wasn't normal. Qin Yu took a deep breath and stood up to wake up Song Zhu. No matter what this place was, he couldn't stay here any longer. He had to leave immediately. But the moment Qin Yu stood up, his complexion changed. Perhaps it was because he had slept on the table for an entire night, but his legs were sore and numb. He stumbled and grabbed onto the table to prevent himself from falling to the ground. The sound of his fall startled Song Zhu awake. She turned around and asked, "What's wrong?" But at this time, Qin Yu didn't have time to answer her question. His eyes widened in disbelief. Numbness in one's legs after a night of sitting was indeed a normal thing, but this corresponded to the standards of ordinary people. For cultivators, there was no pressure at all. But this happened to Qin Yu's body. His first thought was that this wasn't good. He immediately wanted to investigate the situation within his body, and then he froze. Because at this moment, Qin Yu discovered that he had become an ordinary person. All of his strength had completely disappeared. Normally, he could use his spiritual will as he wished, but now, he could not sense it at all. Was it an illusion or a dream? Within his chest, his heart began to beat wildly. An intense restlessness and fear shrouded Qin Yu's mind. What nonsense! Just a day ago, he was a lofty and aloof cultivator who could summon clouds and rain with a wave of his hand. But now, after a night of inexplicable sleep, he had lost all of his martial arts, and one of his attributes had been erased. who would be able to accept the result of switching attributes to a blank account. In particular, after suddenly losing all of his strength, he felt a deep panic and helplessness. It wasn't easy for Qin Yu to be able to calmly think about this. "Brother Qin, what's wrong?" Song Zhu cautiously asked. Qin Yu's complexion was so ugly that he looked like he wanted to eat someone. His face was so gloomy that it seemed as if it could drip water. Unless she was blind, she wouldn't be able to see it. Awakened by her voice, Qin Yu regained his composure. Ignoring the numbness in his feet, he quickly walked over to the bed and grabbed Song Zhu. "Can you sense whether or not your cultivation is still there?" Song Zhu was startled. She was worried that Qin Yu was about to go berserk so early in the morning. But after a moment of disappointment, her complexion paled. Looking at this, there was no need to ask any more questions. Qin Yu rubbed his temples, unable to figure out why things were like this. Song Zhu nearly cried. Her voice trembled as she said, "Brother Qin?" She carefully looked out the window. Qin Yu understood her meaning. In fact, after he forced himself to calm down, he had already thought about what would happen next. After a night, when he faced these two people who had lost their cultivation, what sort of attitude would the people outside have? At this time, there was a knock on the door. It was followed by the gentle voice of the mistress. "Honored guests, are you awake? It's time to eat breakfast." If it was a blessing, it wasn't a curse. If it was a curse, he couldn't avoid it. Qin Yu took a deep breath and turned to open the door. Song Zhu grabbed him and subconsciously shook her head. "We will have to face it sooner or later. There is no way to avoid it." Qin Yu pulled away Song Zhu's hand and arrived at the door. He paused for a moment and then reached out to open the door. Outside, the mistress of the village chief's house seemed to be startled by his solemn expression. "I'm sorry, I have disturbed the honored guest's rest. If it isn't convenient now, you can eat breakfast later." It seemed as if nothing had changed. Qin Yu's heart relaxed a little, but he still didn't dare to be careless. He squeezed out a smile and said, "No, I didn't rest well last night. Madam, please go first. We will be there soon." Time was tight. After the mistress left, Qin Yu quickly returned. "Pretend that nothing happened. Let's take things one step at a time. Perhaps things aren't as bad as you and I think." Reality proved that Qin Yu was right. When he brought Song Zhu to the table, he immediately received an apology from the village chief. He said that he drank too much yesterday and lost face in front of the honored guests, so he asked him not to laugh at him. As for the three daughters, they buried their heads in their food. They would occasionally glance at Qin Yu and then immediately lower their heads, their pink and tender ears blushing red. Soon, they said that they had finished eating. After bowing to Qin Yu and Song Zhu, they turned and hurried out with their farm tools. After the meal, the village chief said that he would be busy with farm work and that the two honored guests could rest at home. After tidying up, he also stood up and left. In the blink of an eye, all that was left was the charming mistress. Qin Yu and Song Zhu sat in the courtyard, both of them feeling a bit relieved. It seemed that there really wasn't a problem. It seemed that the village chief and the others hadn't realized that they had lost their cultivations. What should they do next? Song Zhu looked at Qin Yu. After losing her strength, a woman's heart was even more fragile. She unconsciously regarded him as the only one she could rely on. But Qin Yu wasn't in the mood to enjoy the refreshing feeling of a beautiful woman supporting him. He was constantly trying to communicate with the old turtle in the stone pagoda. But in the end, all his attempts ended in failure. Qin Yu took a deep breath and stood up. "I want to try and see whether or not I can leave this place." Song Zhu blurted out, "I'll go with you." It was impossible for her to stay behind by herself. Qin Yu nodded, not speaking. The two of them left together. Outside, there was an old man basking in the sun. As he saw the new face, the old man revealed a smile and vaguely greeted him. After nodding in return, Qin Yu turned and walked out of the village. The air was fresh and the wilderness was beautiful. There was no sun overhead, but it was unknown where the light came from. Butterflies spread their wings and several rabbits ran out from the grass, their ears twitching. They vigilantly glanced at Qin Yu and then turned around and jumped back into the grass, vanishing from sight. This scene was tranquil, one that Yu hadn't felt for a long time. But this time, he wasn't in the mood to pay attention to it. He just kept walking. Who? His heartbeat quickened, his breathing quickened, and his legs grew sore. This was a feeling he hadn't felt for a long time. Yu bitterly smiled. He never thought that there would be a day when he would experience the hardships of being a mortal on the road again. The village was located in a valley. If they wanted to leave, they had to climb up the mountain. When they came down, it was incomparably easy, but when they left, it would be so difficult. The fields were scattered and scattered. They were cut into small flat areas in the mountains. As the farmers saw Yu and Songzhu walking towards them, they stopped what they were doing and greeted them with smiles on their faces. No one asked them where they were going, and no accidents appeared to stop them from leaving the village. It seemed as if this place wasn't guarded at all. They could enter and leave if they wanted. Yu felt that he could still persist for a bit longer, but Songzhu's footsteps behind him had become much quieter. He looked back and saw that the woman had already fallen over a dozen meters away. Her face was pale and her hair was wet with sweat, sticking to her forehead. She clenched her teeth and didn't speak. He looked up and saw that there was at least half of the road left. Then he found a stone and sat down. Songzhu walked over. Before she could say a single word, she leaned against the stone and gasped for breath. This woman was strong on one hand, but she was also worried that Yu would become impatient and leave her behind. After all, in the current situation, who would care about others? Yu could sense this, but he wasn't in the mood to say anything. He closed his eyes and rested. A moment later, he opened his eyes. Let's go. Songzhu clearly hadn't rested well yet. She didn't say anything, only clenching her teeth and nodding. As they continued to climb the mountain, the wind became a bit stronger. As it blew against their faces, the sweat evaporated and brought with it a cool feeling. But this time, Yu suddenly stopped. This was because the cool mountain wind now carried a bit more of a fishy smell. After all attributes had been erased, and he had become a whiteboard account, the abilities of his body had actually been preserved. For instance, Yu's 5 senses were far sharper than the average person's. He could sense that there was something wrong with the wind, as well as the faint sound of footsteps. Perhaps they sensed that their prey had discovered them. As the dense grass was parted, 2 wild wolves darted out from within. Looking at their sizes, one was male and one was female. Their green eyes fell on the 2 of them. Saliva dripped down their tongues and onto the ground, revealing a cruel and callous expression. Without hesitation, with a low roar, the 2 wild wolves rushed out. The division of labor was clear. The male wolf rushed straight towards Yu, opening his mouth to reveal sharp fangs that shined with a cold light. Chapter 1281. Surprisingly, the village chief had superb archery skills. 2 arrows pierced through the eyes of the 2 wolves. They screamed as they were nailed to the ground, becoming wolf corpses. Songzhu was in a better condition. Other than being bitten on her arm, she was protected behind her back. However, Yu's robe was soaked in blood. I was almost bitten to death by 2 wolves. Yu laughed at himself. He turned around and fell into Songzhu's arms. When he woke up again, it was already 3 days later. In the village chief's words, he was really bold. He was about to get married, but he secretly took his wife to the mountains to play. If he didn't pass by, the 2 of them would have been eaten by the wolves. Songzhu cried tears of joy. After repeatedly thanking the village chief and the others, she nervously looked at Yu, as if she was afraid he would faint again. Perhaps it was because of the high fever that hadn't subsided for 3 days. Although Yu had woken up, he had a splitting headache. His brain felt like it was filled with paste. He could only feel the shadows of people overlapping in front of him. It was so uncomfortable that he wanted to vomit. The village chief stood up and said, "Since you're awake, there won't be any big problems. However, the wounds on your body still need to rest for a while. Xuanfu, don't mess around anymore. When you're better, I'll immediately arrange for you to get married. That way, you can control your wild nature." His head was dizzy and uncomfortable, but he heard this sentence clearly. Chinyu's eyes suddenly brightened. He felt countless memories exploding in his mind, drowning his still weak consciousness. My name is Zhao Chuanfu, an orphan in the village. My parents died in an accident when I was young. I was raised by the elders in the village. I had a fiancée called Aju. She was an orphan like me. After we got close, the villagers brought us together. I was very happy because I was finally going to have a family. I was finally not alone. But not long before we got married, probably because I was too happy, I did something stupid. I actually brought Aju up the mountain. I wanted to help her pick some wildflowers to make her wedding dress. We encountered a wild wolf. Fortunately, the village head saved us. As for me, I acted like a man and used my own life to protect Aju. This made some of the bastards in the village who didn't want Aju to marry me finally shut their mouths. It was a pleasant surprise. Of course, what made me even happier was that my wounds were finally healed. The wedding date was set. Although there was a scar on my face, Aju said it was a symbol of a man's courage. Every time I saw this scar, I would remember when I tried to protect her. Aju was a good woman. I swore I would be good to her for the rest of my life. But the only thing that I don't understand is that after I woke up from my coma, I often dream at night, but I can't remember what happened in my dreams. The wedding process wasn't ostentatious or complicated. Because the newlyweds on both sides were orphans, the village chief was elected by everyone to sit on the elder's seat. He received a big bow from the newlyweds, and his old face beamed like a flower. He said that their parents could rest in peace if they knew. On their wedding night, Zhao Chuanfu had a dream again. He clenched his teeth and clenched his fists. His whole body was drenched in sweat, and his whole body was trembling. Ah! With a loud shout, he sat up abruptly. Aju, who had been awakened for a while, hurriedly reached out to hug him and comforted him. Quan Ji, it's all right. It's just a dream. Quan, he, in his of, he, in. Chinyu? Who is Chinyu? Why should I remember this name? Also, what's with the woman's face in the dream? The dream was still vague, but there was something more. In the blink of an eye, 3 months passed. The new family became stable. Everyone in the village praised them as a loving couple. Zhao Chuanfu was a down-to-earth person. He was proficient in farming and hunting. Aju was also clever and deft. Her weaving skills were recognized by the old women. Their daily lives were quite prosperous. But every night, Zhao Chuanfu would wake up from his dream. Aju tried her best to comfort him, but it was useless. Another night, Zhao Chuanfu, who was lying on the bed, hugged his head with one hand and punched his chest with the other. When he woke up, he finally told his wife the truth. There was always a voice in his dream, shouting the name Chinyu. There was also a woman he had never seen before. He held Aju's hand tightly. His eyes were nervous. Aju, I swear I have never done anything wrong to you. I don't have any impression of this name or this woman. But I don't know why the voice in my dream and the woman's figure became vague. I felt very uncomfortable. It was like my chest was about to be cut open. Aju hugged him. She tried to keep calm. Her eyes were full of tenderness. I believe you. Of course I believe you. Brother Quan, since it will make you feel uncomfortable to forget this name and that woman, then find a way not to forget. Maybe you can get rid of this nightmare. That day, Zhao Chuanfu, who always worked hard, did not go out with his farm tools. Instead, he went to Old Man Wang's house at the entrance of the village to ask him for advice on carpentry. It was also from that day onwards that Zhao Chuanfu became the second person in the village to know how to carve. He studied very seriously and improved very quickly. 2 years later, before Old Man Wang passed away, he smiled and said that he had already surpassed his predecessor and could finish his apprenticeship. After finishing his work in the fields, Zhao Chuanfu ate dinner with Aju. Before the sky darkened, Zhao Chuanfu put down his bowl and chopsticks. Then, he got up and walked into the backyard. Behind him, Azu looked at his back with a complicated look in her eyes. She immediately laughed and shook her head. She was really too much. How could she be jealous of a statue? Fortunately, she did not show it in front of Brother Quan. Otherwise, it would make him feel embarrassed. If he wanted to carve, then he could carve. After all, that kind of painting wouldn't appear in this remote and secluded mountain village. She could just consider it a cure for her obsession. But at this time, Zhao Chuanfu had already picked up a piece of wood. He sat down in front of the polished table and began to work after a moment of thought. The carving tool was specifically given to him by Old Man Wang. Although he had used it for many years, it was still nimble and sharp in Zhao Chuanfu's hands. As his hands moved, wood shavings and fragments fell down. Soon, a woman's face appeared. Although it was still rough and her eyebrows weren't clear, just the simple outline of her face made one feel a sense of peerless beauty. As time passed, the statue in Zhao Chuanfu's hands gradually turned into a palm-sized, lifelike beauty. The corners of her lips curled up. Her full and round lips carried a gentle smile. When combined with her black eyes, it gave off a faint feeling as if she were staring at you and smiling at you. Zhao Chuanfu was stunned for a moment. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. When his heart calmed down, he turned and pushed open the door to the newly built wooden house in the backyard. At this time, the sun was setting in the west and the light was dim. Inside the house, there were neatly arranged wooden shelves with statues quietly placed on them. Several wooden shelves were now mostly full. Zhao Chuanfu placed the statue in his hand on top and said in a soft voice, "Qinyu, is that your name? Although I don't know why I can hear your voice, I think you want me to help you remember this woman. Don't worry, I will make a statue every day. Even if my memory is blurry the next day, as long as I close my eyes, my instinct will tell me to make a statue that is exactly the same as her. Like this, I will never forget her. So, if this is your goal, you have already accomplished it. Can you not pester me anymore?" On this night, the dream that had tormented Zhao Chuanfu for so many years finally vanished. It was also from this day onwards that Zhu thoroughly extinguished her desire to have Zhao Chuanfu stop sculpting. In the blink of an eye, the two had been married for 10 years. Their days became better and better. After the village chief passed away, some people even suggested that Zhao Chuanfu take over, but he ultimately declined. But it was this enviable family that caused many old people in the village to sigh, because they never had children of their own. Some people said that Zhao Chuanfu couldn't have a family in the end. When the two of them grew old, their bloodline would be severed and they were doomed to die without a family. Zhu cried her heart out that night. The next day, Zhao Chuanfu blushed with embarrassment in front of the villagers. From then on, no one mentioned these matters again. Another 5 years passed. Zhu said that she was willing to divorce. With Zhao Chuanfu's reputation, there would be other girls willing to marry him and carry on the family line. For the first time, Zhao Chuanfu lost his temper. He said that she was the only woman he would ever have in his life and that there would never be a second one. Zhu was moved to tears in his arms. Zhao Chuanfu, who had always been honest and kind, suddenly stiffened. Guilt appeared in his eyes because he felt that he had lied to his wife, even though he hadn't done anything wrong to her. But he probably really did fall in love with the statue he made. Sometimes he even had the urge to lock himself up in that wooden house that was several times larger than before, not wanting to go out. But in the end, he held himself back. Zhao Chuanfu tried to stop making statues, but as if it was an instinct that had been branded into his bones, he found that he couldn't do it. 10 years, another 10 years passed. Batch after batch of old people left the village. Looking at his reflection in the water basin, Zhao Chuanfu discovered that he had also become an old man with a head full of white hair and a face full of wrinkles. The children born later in the village were all very willing to get close to this lonely old couple. Not only was it because their mother-in-law's candy was delicious, but the little wooden animals that Grandpa Fu made also made them scream with joy. Grandpa Fu, Grandpa Fu, Grandma, Grandma. After school, a group of monkeys pushed open the door and rushed into the courtyard. They were startled and immediately fell silent. This was because many of their fathers and grandparents were gathered in the courtyard. Zhao Chuanfu heard the commotion and came out of the house. He took out a wrapped candy and handed it to the children. His voice trembled. "Grandma is sick. I don't have time to make anything for you today, but I'm sure there will be some in a few days." 2 days later, in the night, his mother-in-law's condition worsened. The only doctor in the village cupped his hands together in shame. Grandma doesn't have much time left. He was a member of the younger generation. When he was a child, he had received candy from this old couple, as well as wooden horse and sword carvings. Although they had no children, they were still incomparably loving and kind old people. He had a heartfelt respect for them. Zhao Chuanfu was silent for a moment. Then, he softly said, "That's good." She always said that she didn't want to be the last to leave. She wanted to save face and didn't want others to say it. In fact, she was afraid of the dark. In the early nights, she was always woken up, so she must have suffered a lot. As he spoke, his voice began to tremble. He endured it and cupped his hands together. "There are no juniors at home, so I'm afraid I will have to trouble all of you to help me tomorrow. Before I leave, there are some words that I would like to say to this old woman alone. Please wait outside." Everyone stood up and silently left. Zhao Chuanfu came to the bed and reached out to hold his wife's hand. "You were always afraid that the two of us would be alone. What would we do if we got sick when we grew old? Now, there's no need to be afraid. You can leave so quickly, so you will suffer less. Moreover, I will accompany you, so there's no need to be afraid." Perhaps hearing his voice, his granny slowly opened her eyes after several breaths of time. "I'm not afraid of myself, but I'm worried about what will happen to you. You can accompany me today, but who will accompany you in the future?" As she spoke, tears began to fall. Zhao Chuanfu smiled. "My body is in good health. I'm afraid I still have several more years to live. The future could be considered in the future, so don't think too much about it." He saw his granny's face turn rosy at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although he was smiling, the rims of his eyes turned red. "Don't cry. I'm not crying. It's just that my eyes are uncomfortable from staying up all night. Everyone has this day. You can leave first, but sooner or later, I will come down and reunite with you." Zhao Chuanfu hesitated for a moment. He softly said, "There is something that I have felt guilty about for half my life. If I don't tell you, I won't feel at ease." He looked into his granny's eyes. "I fell in love with the statue that I made a long time ago. Although it was a dead object, I still felt that something was wrong. I was afraid that you wouldn't let me continue, so I never dared to say it. Can you forgive me?" His granny nodded. "I already knew that the way you looked at the statue couldn't lie to me. But she is a statue. I am the woman who has accompanied you your entire life. I am magnanimous and won't compete with her for your heart." Zhao Chuanfu's body trembled. His eyes revealed a trace of fear and shame. He never thought that his deepest thoughts would be discovered. "Azu, I'm sorry." His granny smiled. "I said I don't blame you. I don't regret being able to spend a lifetime with you. But just who was this woman? I didn't even get to see her before I died. I still feel a bit of regret. Old man, my time is up. Don't be sad. Take care of yourself." His granny left. There were tears in her eyes, but her expression was serene. Zhao Chuanfu held her hand until dawn. Then, he went out to invite her in so that he could take care of his funeral. After his funeral, the days of living alone were dry and boring. Luckily, the children of the village would come to ask for puppets from time to time, allowing Zhao Chuanfu to gradually adapt. He no longer needed to farm or hunt. The villagers were willing to support him until he died. Zhao Chuanfu was finally able to lock himself up in his room every day, spending time with the statues he had made his entire life. Azu said she felt regret before she died. "In truth, I also feel regret. Just who are you? And where are you? In this life, I fear I won't have a chance to see you again. In truth, I don't have any other thoughts. I just want to ask, who is that person called Chinyu?" The scale expanded once more. In the wooden house that occupied the entire backyard, there was only the sound of the old man muttering to himself. Finally, there was a boy in the village who was willing to learn carpentry. He was an 8-year-old child named Mushang. He respectfully kowtowed to Zhao Xuanfu, taking him as his disciple. Mu Sheng seemed to be born with this skill. He learned at an astonishing speed. In just 2 months, he was able to use the carving knife that Zhao Xuanfu had passed down to him. But the astonishingly large wooden house in the backyard was still his forbidden zone. Zhao Xuanfu never allowed him to enter. Children were always curious and mischievous. After enduring for a long time, Mu Sheng finally found a chance. He pushed open the door of the wooden house and saw countless statues of women. They were all of the same person, and they were all beautiful and moving. Because of this, Zhao Xuanfu, who had always liked him, became angry for the first time. He slapped his palm, but even though it hurt so much that he cried, he still looked up and asked, "Grandpa Fu, who is that beautiful fairy sister?" This question was met with several more slaps. Zhao Xuanfu waved his hand to drive Mu Sheng away. He looked up at the wooden house. Because he didn't know the answer to this question, Mu Sheng was very obedient. He didn't say anything about the statues in the wooden house. This became a secret between the two of them. Spring came and autumn came. In the blink of an eye, another 3 years passed. This winter was particularly cold. Zhao Fuquan gently coughed. He frowned as he looked at the endless white snow outside. Suddenly, a trace of enlightenment appeared in his mind. His time had arrived. There was no fear, no unwillingness. In fact, at this moment, there was an inexplicable sense of relief in his heart. After a series of steps on the snow, Mu Sheng pushed open the door and came in. "Grandpa Fu, I've come to bring you food. My mother's dumplings are delicious. I rushed over as soon as they came out. Eat them while they're hot." Zhao Fuquan smiled and nodded. "Thank you. It's snowing and cold, and it's getting late. Hurry home and eat." Mu Sheng glanced at him. "Grandpa Fu, I'll come back after eating. I'll stay here to accompany you tonight." Zhao Fuquan waved his hand, his attitude firm. Mu Sheng hesitated again and again. He said that if there was anything, he could ring the bell. His ears were good, and he would definitely hear it. After receiving a reply, he bid farewell and left. Zhao Fuquan glanced at the string tied to the doorway to ring the bell. He got up and pulled open the thick cotton cloth. Steaming hot dumplings appeared in front of him. They were indeed delicious. Unfortunately, his appetite was bad with age. When there were only 5 dumplings left, Zhao Fuquan rubbed his stomach and put down his bowl and chopsticks. It was good enough that he had eaten his fill. As for the remaining 5, he would just keep them as a memento. Zhao Fuquan returned to his bed and lay down. His mind flashed with all the memories of his life. Then, with a single thought in his mind, he fell into a dark and sweet dream. That girl who had lived in his mind for an entire lifetime. That girl who was incomparably painful to forget. Just who was Chinyu? I'm about to die. Can't I get an answer? In the dark night, the wind howled and snow howled. The old man on the bed gradually stopped breathing as he carried this thought that had plagued him for the rest of his life. Who am I? Where am I? Why is it so dark in front of me? Kacha! Where did that sound come from? There's light, it's blinding. He subconsciously raised his hand to block in front of him. His dazed consciousness finally returned. My name is Zhao Fuquan, and I'm already dead. Even before I die, I still have a question. That question is his hand suddenly stopped. After a long time, there was a sigh. So, I am Chinyu. Chapter 1282. Who? Suddenly, a great wind rose up. Like the autumn wind sweeping away fallen leaves, the fog that filled one's field of vision was instantly torn apart. Hidden deep within the mountain was an incomparably massive cave. Within this cave, there were 13 stone statues of giant beasts carrying stone pillars on their backs. They were covered in dark black scales and had large horns on their heads. They were fierce-looking dragons. Their wings were spread out, and their claws and beaks were like hooks. Their limbs were thick and strong, and their shells were cracked like abysses. They seemed like turtles that could support the heavens. Their bodies were pitch black, and their 1,000 eyes were angry. 13 stone statues, each one carrying a giant stone pillar on their back. They were vivid and lifelike. Looking at them, one would feel a sense of oppression as if they could wake up at any moment. They stood scattered, as if they were one with the stone pillars above their heads. It was like they were working together to prop up this cave. Their feet sank into the ground. The mountain stone couldn't withstand the weight of tens of thousands of pounds. Thus countless cracks appeared. Each crack was like a horrifying maw. Around these 13 stone statues, there were also countless stone statues that were either lying or standing. There were beasts, birds, variation species, and even human cultivators. And originally, Chinyu was also one of the most unremarkable of these stone statues. But now, the solidified layer of stone around him had shattered, allowing him to see the light and obtain a new life. Congratulations, Master, for crossing the heart-tempering tribulation. From now on, your Tao heart will be eternally firm, and you will no longer be disturbed by external evils. Your great Tao is destined to be unimpeded. The stone pagoda's voice revealed a rare excitement, filled with praise and joy. Even though the stone pagoda had been by Qin Yu's side for a long time and had seen his extraordinary luck, it still filled its heart with despair not too long ago. This was because what Qin Yu experienced was a heart-tempering tribulation that no one could interfere with. He could only rely on his own will to resist it. This tribulation tempered a cultivator's heart towards the Tao. If one didn't have great willpower and obsession, it was impossible to withstand it. Once one's heart towards the Tao was destroyed, they would lose their beliefs and completely forget their own mark. Then, they would forever fall into the heart-tempering tribulation and perish. Perhaps it was difficult to truly feel how terrifying it was with a simple description, but clear evidence was often more powerful. For hundreds of millions of years, the heart-tempering tribulation of the Lost Garden Mountain had welcomed countless trial challengers, all of whom had become one of the stone statues here. Qin Yu was the first and only person to awaken. The others were all here. And at this time, as his consciousness returned to normal, he was already aware of what had happened to his body. As he heard these words, his expression remained calm. He flicked his sleeves and removed the stone fragments from his body. Then he turned around and looked at Songzhu, who was still in a stone statue state. A complicated look appeared in his eyes, but it was quickly concealed. It was just a tribulation of tempering one's heart. Now that the tribulation had passed, everything that he had experienced during the tribulation would disappear forever like a bubble. He took a deep breath and let out a breath. Then, he lifted a finger and touched Songzhu's forehead. "Wake up!" He exhaled and shouted. Just as his voice fell, "Kacha, Kacha," sounds of shattering rang out. The layer of stone outside the hidden pearl's body shattered. This heart-tempering tribulation was a tribulation the two of them had to cross together. If Qin Yu could survive, she could also survive. It was just that she wouldn't be able to obtain any harvest from the heart tribulation. "Ah!" Songzhu cried out. She lifted a hand in front of her eyes. After several breaths of time, she saw Qin Yu standing in front of her. His eyes widened in pleasant surprise. "Big Brother Quan." He pounced forward, but in the next moment, just a few feet away from Qin Yu, he froze where he was. He looked at his face, his eyes frozen. Qin Yu lightly said, "It was nothing more than a dream. Now that you have awoken from your dream, Miss Songzhu shouldn't care too much about it." Songzhu was stunned. She took a step back. Brother Qin is right. The heart tribulation is like a dream. A dream has already passed, so there's no need to mention it again. Qin Yu nodded and changed the topic. "I think we've arrived at the deepest part of this mountain. These 13 stone statues." Qin Yu said, "They're stone statues. But not too long ago, you and I nearly became one of these stone statues. So, many years ago, there were 13 incomparably powerful ancient life forms in front of us. In fact, I can't help but think that they might have been one of the existences that created the Lost Garden." Songzhu's eyes brightened. Then, she frowned. After a moment of hesitation, she took a deep breath and said, "Before, I said that I would tell Brother Qin a secret. Now I can tell you." She looked at Chinyu and took a deep breath. Before, the fragments that I gave to Brother Chin were likely fragments of some powerful life form after it broke out of its shell. Chinyu's pupils shrank. Eggshell speak? In truth, this was indeed unexpected. And what left him even more incredulous was the terrifying strength contained within this eggshell. Even the body of a true saint puppet was as fragile as an ant, easily destroyed with a single strike. If this really was only an eggshell, then just how terrifying was the life form bred within it? Faintly, he seemed to think of something, but he couldn't grasp what it was. Song Zhu continued to say, I came from the East Sea, so it is highly likely that the old ancestor of my clan came from the Lost Garden, from this towering mountain. Qin Yu subconsciously rejected this. Impossible. The life forms within the Lost Garden are all restricted by the rules of the world. It is absolutely impossible for them to leave this place. Song Zhu said, although this is the truth, there are exceptions to everything in this world. I don't know the specifics, but it is highly likely that my clan's old ancestor escaped the Lost Garden through a great calamity that occurred in the early years of the world. She bit her lips. This time, the old ancestor wished to take my brother and me's lives in order to extend his own lifespan. I was willing to die, but how innocent is my younger brother? Thus, he came to the Lost Garden in an attempt to find other ways to help the old ancestor extend his life. Qin Yu said, what else do you know? Song Zhu took a deep breath. Brother Qin, in the future, if there's a chance that we can find something to extend our lifespan, I hope that you can give me a portion. I don't need too much. All lucky chances and good fortune will belong to Brother Qin, and Song Zhu will not take any more than that. Her eyes were filled with pleading. Qin Yu said, all right. Song Zhu bowed. Thank you, Brother Qin. With just a single word, she believed him. She didn't believe this Qin Yu, but she was willing to believe in the man who had once shared a mortal life with her in her heart tribulation. Song Zhu stood up. Before coming to the Lost Garden, I secretly looked through the old ancestors' notes. There seems to be a terrifying life form suppressed within this mountain. And in the past, the reason that ancient life forms were able to resist the great calamity of the world and forcefully construct the Lost Garden was because they had the corpse of this terrifying life form as their foundation. What you and I see now is that the true function of these 13 ancient life forms stone statues is likely to suppress the corpse of that terrifying life form and use its strength to maintain the existence of the Lost Garden. As for the stone pillars above their heads, they're the channels through which energy is transmitted. Deep within Qin Yu's mind, a brilliant light exploded. He had finally grasped the thought that had been wavering in his mind before. It was just a piece of eggshell, yet it possessed such terrifying power that it could easily wipe out the puppet body of a true sage. What Song Zhu had said was that the ancient life forms had used the energy from the corpse of that terrifying life form to construct the Lost Garden that defied the will of the world. It had to be known that the only one that could defy the will of the world was the world itself, or an existence that possessed the ability to communicate with the world. That was a pre-celestial spirit, because looking at the vast world, only a pre-celestial spirit could accomplish this. Qin Yu thought back to the underground lake of magma and the spirit snake he had killed and refined. Could it be that buried within this mountain were its parents? No, that couldn't be right. A pre-celestial spirit was born from the world, so it was impossible for it to reproduce. Moreover, when Qin Yu heard the words, "Do you need protection?" where did they come from? Why couldn't Song Zhu hear them? Could it be because he had refined and absorbed over half of the strength of the spirit snake? Qin Yu's thoughts were like the sea, but he didn't reveal any of it on his face. As the saying went, if one's chest was struck by thunder, one's face would be as still as a lake. The heart-tempering tribulation tempered one's heart towards a Tao. At the same time, it also tempered one's will and obsession. It was enough to temper one's nerves to an incomparably tough state. Stone Pagoda, he shouted out in his heart. The stone pagoda said, "Master, I am listening." It was silent for several breaths of time. The information is fragmented, and I cannot make an accurate judgment. But I can only tell Master that this isn't impossible. The corpse of a pre-celestial spirit, a complete pre-celestial spirit in its peak state. If this is true, then the ancient life forms of the past must have done something far greater than anyone can imagine. But this isn't right. For a mature pre-celestial spirit, unless its fate has come to an end and it naturally dissipates from the world, becoming a part of the world once more, there is no one that has the qualifications to kill it, because it is nearly the world itself. The old turtle suddenly said, "You forgot something. The spirit snake that you and I joined forces to kill was also a pre-celestial spirit. It is also an innate spirit that has been imprisoned by the rules of the Lost Garden. For countless years, it has remained in an infant state." The stone pagoda blurted out, "Nirvanic rebirth." Rebirth. Its voice trembled. If the legends are true, then there really is a possibility. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. "What is it?" The stone pagoda rapidly spoke. "In the legends, every epoch that passes by, a pre-celestial spirit will approach the end of its life. It can choose to dissipate and return to the world once more. Or, through some marvelous method, it can give birth to a new version of itself. Then it can grow and awaken, starting a new life. This process is called nirvanic rebirth. The shadow of the abyss reminded me that the spirit snake that Master killed before was likely a pre-celestial spirit that underwent nirvanic rebirth, or it could be said that it was an incomplete and newly born pre-celestial spirit. Thus, it was restricted by the rules of the Lost Garden and was trapped in a juvenile state. That's right, this is a very likely possibility. Before this, I suspected that even if ancient life forms were able to open up a lost garden in defiance of the heavens, it would be absolutely impossible for them to restrict the growth of a pre-celestial spirit. This is because that is the same as a self-perfecting process of a small world. But if it is incomplete, then there is a possibility. Moreover, this can also explain why those incomparably powerful ancient era's organisms would suddenly vanish a long time ago. It was as if they were directly erased from the river of time by an invisible hand, and not a trace of them was left behind. The old turtle indicated that he didn't understand what the stone pagoda was saying. But this wasn't important. What was important was that he had interfered. Now, the stone pagoda was no longer the only person in the limelight. Qin Yu also didn't understand. But he didn't urge the stone pagoda. It was like he was organizing his thoughts. After several breaths of time, the stone pagoda took a deep breath and said, "Master, I will tell you a story. It might be true, or it might just be a wrong imagination that we came up with based on the current information. A long, long time ago, there was a powerful pre-celestial spirit that lived to the end of an era. It didn't want to die, so it chose to undergo nirvanic rebirth. But for some unknown reason, this secret was leaked out. Or perhaps it was a group of desperate thugs that just happened to find the best opportunity. And this group of desperate thugs were the ancient life forms that once ruled over the vast young world. After undergoing nirvanic rebirth, the pre-celestial spirit was in an unprecedentedly weak state. This gave the ancient life forms a chance. They gathered their most powerful existences and joined forces to launch an attack against the pre-celestial spirit. The result of this battle was that nearly all of the ancient life forms' powerhouses perished. As for the pre-celestial spirit, it was also killed. Its corpse became the foundation that the ancient life forms relied on to construct the Lost Garden. But before it died, the pre-celestial spirit split off and created an incomplete version of itself. That version just happened to be sealed away by the Lost Garden. In other words, it was the spirit snake that Master killed. The story wasn't complex, and it was soon finished. But whether it was Qin Yu, the stone tower, or the old turtle, none of them spoke again. Because if this was the truth of history, then not only did it prove how powerful and crazy the ancient life forms of the past were, but it also meant that there was a high chance that they were in the grave of a mature pre-celestial spirit. And this dead pre-celestial spirit, even if it was only the remnant strength of its corpse, was able to contend with the will of the world and maintain the existence of the lost garden to this day. If this was all, then perhaps they would sigh in amazement and feel their hearts surge with excitement. But Qin Yu was different, because not too long ago, he had killed a spirit snake and plundered its strength. Qin Yu, the old turtle, the stone tower, and even the robed purple-backed blue-wing ants, all of them had a part in this. There were two possibilities. The first was that they had been instinctively erased by the pre-celestial spirit. Based on what they knew, in the blink of an eye, all of them would be crushed into dregs. But up until now, they had entered the mountain and hadn't encountered any terrifying strength that they couldn't resist. In other words, this possibility could be ignored. Then, there was only the second possibility. Qin Yu could hear a voice that Song Zhu couldn't hear. That voice had asked him if he needed protection. Could this be considered a sign that it had obtained a preliminary approval? In fact, that voice might even be the remnant instincts left behind by the pre-celestial spirit's mortal body after it died. It had already approved of Qin Yu. Or, to be more precise, it had approved of the spirit snake's strength that had been refined and absorbed within Qin Yu's body. But this wasn't important. What was important was that at this moment, Qin Yu, the stone tower, and the old turtle had discovered the possibility of a golden mountain once more. Or, to put it more accurately, it was a terrifying dining table so large that it could cover the heavens and earth. This table was filled with a sumptuous feast that had been prepared for them, the already dead adult pre-celestial spirit. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.